righty. All righty. It's Monday, September 21st, folks. Thanks for watching What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. It is What Are the Odds with Baris right now. Barnes will be here in a hot minute. I wanted to bring a couple of things up. Can we get rid of the Inside the Numbers logo, please? Thank you. All right, so here we go, right? So I wanted to talk about the Rust Belt poll, which we'll do with Barnes in a lot more detail in a second, because I think some people are misreading it. And I think that both sides, by the way, and I think that there's some really good questions in the queue. So we'll start with some of them, and we'll talk about, before I even jump on anything here, Chicago Fed National Activity Index, scrolling at the bottom of the screen. That's nice for this time of year. Of course, it's down from the month before, but the month before was revised so much higher, right? The preliminary reading on the CFNAI is always adjusted because they have not a lot of data to work with when they start it, right? So they always revise it when they get more actual real data in. All right, data in. All right, Wisconsin, Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. These are the states where this election will be decided. I am telling you, if Donald Trump is to lose North Carolina or even the state of Florida, then he's going to lose the election anyway, and he was in trouble anyway in those states. The Rust Belt is where either he can hold on by holding one, maybe adding another state, a combination of one and another northeastern state, or it's where Joe Biden can box him out. This is the part of the country to watch on election night, even though election night will be election days and election weeks, because we've allowed them to turn us into a third world country, which counts votes like worse than Afghanistan. Okay. I mean, really, actually, for those of you who were in the military during the nation building years of George W. Bush, they wouldn't even allow this kind of crap in Afghanistan or Iraq. You go vote, right? Any of these emerging democracies, you get the purple finger, right? Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. I know what you get the purple finger. It stays on there. You know you voted already. The officials know you have voted already, and you can no longer vote. All right. Like UN election supervisors wouldn't allow this kind of third world crap in these emerging democracies. But here we are. Michigan will count votes for 2 weeks. Pennsylvania will count votes for at least a week, because they're going to allow them, if they came in before that Friday, as long as they're postmarked. I hate to tell you folks, but you can't always trust the postman to do the right thing. All right. I know two notary publics who would love to do that crap for $20. Anyway, here we go. So let's talk about this. First thing that people jumped down my throat when we talked about this, and now we got Barnes. So let me bring them on. The first thing that people talk about, how could he be down by 6 among registered voters? And a lot of people gave, and I saw Robert too on Twitter responding, like, I think you guys are misreading this poll, right? So I'm going to let him do his thing. But Hillary Clinton was always up in registered voters in our polling. So that's number one. She was always up in registered voters, except for in a few periods in the summer. But we never found what other people found. Let's bring in Robert here. Robert, I'm just explaining. Here we go. I was just explaining to people. All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let me just I think I'm fixing my camera. I got it. Well, dadgummit.
Audio sounds good, but the camera's flopping.
There it is.
I was just explaining to people how in 2016 we never really, like, there registered voters and likely voters, the difference, and he's flopping down. You want me to give you a second here?
Let me just do this right here.
Just hang on. I was gonna flip and Robert, he's got his stogie.
Now it should be good.
Well, yeah, it should. But let me. You can hear me, right? While I talk, while you fix this.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm trying to explain to people. Take your time, man. I'm trying to explain to people that the registered voter results should really be thought of as if the entire universe of voters were to come out that we polled. All right. And the difference in the likely voter result in our Rust Belt poll, which we'll go over in a second, is it's significant. So this is typical, except for the media and the university polls. They do this in the era of Trump. Likely voters typically help Republican candidates, but registered voters, maybe the gap isn't that big with these media polls and university polls. We just haven't found that. In some of these polls, actually, in the Maris poll, for instance, their registered voter sample was Trump +1 in Florida, and their likely voter was tied at 48. This happened to us in 2016 too. It's backward from what we are finding. All right. This was absolutely the case. So in Michigan, it was consistently Hillary +12. I mean, Hillary +6, not 12. My God. Hillary +6, Hillary +4, Hillary +5. And in the likely voter, it was tighter. If you look, and I'm going to bring up these results in a second, right? If you look at these results, Robert, that difference in the people who say between the register and the likely voter, that difference is straight up the people who approve of him, but don't tell you off the bat that they're going to vote for him. And then when you push them to make a decision and exclude people who will not tell you whether they're decided or not, in truth, those people just may not vote, right? So, that's what Democrats are praying does not happen, right? So that's why they're doing this quasi kind of election. But the bottom line is, and here's the public view, right? Yeah. Okay. So there's the distribution. Looked pretty good. These are how many people we junked off the bat, folks. So what is this statistically? What does this tell me? This electorate looks like 2016. I'm talking about size. It looks a lot like 2016. So there's 180 million people are going to come out, 165 million. We don't see that, Robert, at all. And of those, even the ones that were certain to vote, about 84%, right? The entire registered voter pool here, Trump 41, Biden 47. So +6, it's like 6 on the nose with tenths of percentage points. But with the likely voter model, much, much closer. Trump gains almost all of those people. So when when he gets 6 out of 8 voters who have to be nudged into telling you, right? He gets 6 out of 8, which I just find funny, is almost identical to the difference in the gap in his approval rating. It's almost identical, right? I mean, so people and then the enthusiasm difference is enormous. And do I have that? Did I put this up here? So people are like a little bit misreading this. What they should take away from this is that this is why Democrats absolutely want mail-in votes. They want to make it as easy as possible, because I am like thoroughly convinced that, Biden cannot beat him in a regular election. And by regular, I mean without all of these, the Michigan judge, you're a lawyer, Robert, maybe you can clue us in a little bit more when you get things set up over there. But the judge specifically tailored this ruling to this election year. So never will, going forward, we won't be doing this, but in this election year, we're going to do this. I mean, I've never seen anything like this before. Jump right out at me off the bat. Is your vote more a vote for your candidate or against the opponent? 8 in 10 Trump voters say their vote is a vote for the president. Less than 17% say their vote is against. So 78.8 for, 16.9 against. Is your vote more vote for your preferred candidate or a vote against your opponent? 46.9 Joe Biden, 47.8 is it again, against the opponent, right? So he actually has slightly more people saying that their vote is against Donald Trump than it is for him. How many candidacies have we seen like this before go down in flames? And now I'm not saying, maybe it doesn't hold. Maybe a history doesn't hold, Robert, because of all these mail-in schemes, but this is a loser. This is a loser. And there's no Larry Sabato, the rest of them. They can't make a damn argument against this because I'm right and they know I'm right. These are losers. People who have voters backing them because they just don't like the other guy lose. They can't find me a single election where that guy has won.
No, and in fact, I think what it is a lot of people misinterpreted the poll because they don't necessarily have sort of how we would look at this if we were inside a campaign and had campaign because we have campaign experience. A lot of people don't, and so I think that's why they misinterpret the data. And it was what you would expect to find given the national environment. Registered voters or likely voters up 4, registered voters would be up more. You would expect the Rust Belt poll to come back at Biden doing 2 points better than Hillary did, which is exactly what it showed up as. And so for people to understand, what really matters is the numbers that I'm looking for in a poll like this is one, what you were talking about, the enthusiasm gap, because the enthusiasm gap has predicted the winner in pretty much every presidential election in polling history. And then for those folks who don't know, that's who is extremely enthusiastic more for their supporters. If there's a substantial edge there, and it was outside the margin of error, then that candidate has won every time. And the reason why it translates that way goes back to my old betting mechanism and model that I tried to fully understand in 2012. I just bet based on whether or not the party incumbent had meaningful competition within his own primary. And if he didn't, then usually the opposing party nominated a politician rather than a president. And that combination of those two factors led to re-election every single time in American history. And I started getting curious in 2012 why that was, because a lot of models that used to work stopped working in 2004. There were, job approval models.
Yeah.
Our friend Sean Trendy, he still hasn't fully appreciated that. I mean, he was big on the job approval model in 2012. And I kept pointing out 2004, it had failed. Because W was underwater for most of those years, under 50% for most of the year. And in the same capacity, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the lack of opposition within the incumbent party. It meant a politician type would be selected in the opposition party, which in turn would mean turnout differential. That what happens is when they love you, they vote for you. When they hate you, they often don't turn out to vote against you. And that's what the pattern is going all the way back through history. But it was particularly pronounced in our last 2 incumbent elections, 2004, 2012. If you look at how, even though there was a big spike in turnout in 2004, that's a little bit misleading because in 2000, there was unusually historically low turnout. And so in 2004, there was a spike in turnout, but there was more turnout in evangelical strongholds for Bush than there were in Democratic, African-American, and other strongholds for Kerry. Same thing repeats itself in 2012. And it was if like a registered voter poll, or I'll just say registered vote, or at least a traditional likely voter poll model, like Gallup, would have predicted, and as Gallup did, that Romney would have won.
That Romney was going to win. That's right.
The 2004, very similar. A lot of polls predicting Kerry would win. What they were missing was that Bush's people were going to vote come hell or high water. Kerry people were not. And it was disproportionately millennials who didn't turn out for Kerry, and it was disproportionately working class whites that did not turn out for Romney, while it was disproportionately evangelical marginal voters, downscale evangelical voters that turned out for W, and similarly downscale African American voters that turned out for Obama. The millennials went home, but he got the African American vote out in record levels. The only election in American history where African American turnout was higher than white turnout. So that's why when we're looking at these data, we're looking at things other than the top line. So it's more looking at where is the enthusiasm, where is the excitement, where is the intensity, who has strong support, who doesn't, how are things trending within certain groups. That's why for me, I was much more interested in what was happening in Macomb and Monroe in Michigan than I was the rest of the state. And there's multiple reasons for that, but my concern was that if Biden had a unique opportunity in Michigan, it would be due to the auto bailout, which would show up in Macomb and Monroe, because those are very blue-collar precincts that are very auto industry dependent. When that did not show up, when in fact Trump is overperforming his 2016 numbers in those blue-collar counties, then I'm not as worried about the fact that a lot of rural voters are not declaring who they're going to vote for, that people are parking their vote with either libertarians or undecideds. The Florida Atlantic University confirmed the same thing that you were confirming, which is that undecided voters were breaking toward Trump. That when you go to a strict,
it's big.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people are not saying they're going to vote. So my view when I saw that number is, just as when I saw the +4 for Biden nationally, I interpreted that as an even race, effectively because of the internals, the excitement level, the enthusiasm level, the intensity level, certain demographic trends. The same is true of the Rust Belt. I interpreted your poll, the Epoch Times poll, is it, by the way, is it Epoch Times or Epoch?
It's the Epoch.
Epoch. Okay.
Epoch. Yeah, I asked them the same thing.
I was doing it wrong both sides. All right. So the Epoch Times, a great publication for everybody out there. You can go out and subscribe, not only get access to all of the big data poll data, but a range of other good information. They are always ahead of the curve on China-related issues, founded by a religious dissident group that has been prosecuted and punished and persecuted by the Chinese authorities. They were the first ones to report that it likely came out of a lab, the Wuhan lab, is where the Wuhan virus likely arose from, or at least there was good reason to investigate it further. It was dismissed as a conspiracy theory at the time. Now there's more and more people acknowledging that it's likely the case. Senator Cotton had said it was likely the case earlier.
Can I say something real quick on this? I want people to grab their you-know-whats and start speaking out, because we know a lot of people who are working on vaccine trials, all right? I don't know where, look, I just try to state the data, but people talk to me, man, like I'm Barbara Walters or something, they open up, and we know people, we've spoken to people who are on the leading, I won't blow them totally out of the water, but Moderna is not the leader in the vaccine race. They're not even close to this other company, which is far ahead, and knew that the traditional method, would have to be RNA based, even though that's Moderna's specialty, right? They were way behind the curve on that. But they better grab it and start speaking up, because the very first thing they said when we spoke to them is, this does not appear to be natural. Okay. We shouldn't have to reconstruct the RNA for a coronavirus, right? It just that is not how, and I'm not, a virologist, or so I don't really speak this language, so I'm like, break it down to me like I'm an idiot. What are you talking about? And they basically were skeptical right off the jump and suspected that this thing did not come from nature. There was no way it came from a wet market. I don't understand, and I do know where they're coming from. I'm just saying, if it was me, I would still blow the horn. I would still do it, right? But they were afraid, not just in other governments and the media. They were afraid that our government will get mad at them for saying things, prematurely, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So they're afraid of losing out on that money, man, on those contracts. So they're going to keep their mouths shut for now. But this is not like only Fox News and CNN are still thinking, telling people, like, only doctors on like stupid cable news who aren't involved in this still believe this crap, Robert. Like, I mean, really.
No doubt about it. I think there'll be more broke. And it's just basically another reason to read. I had followed, so it's Epoch.
Yeah, like the epoch, like
Epoch.
I guess, like, yeah, like epoch, like we're living in an epoch, kind of, yeah. Because I said the same thing.
I figured out a way to rhyme it. But the reason why they're great is I'd followed them always because they were ahead of the curve on China. But they were also ahead of the curve on Spygate reporting and putting that together in an informative way. So it's a great publication for people to follow and subscribe to, not just to get the big data.
Apparently, Rush Limbaugh is talking about me right now. People are telling me that.
That's probably right.
Oh, Lord. There's the bullseye.
I've been mentioned by Limbaugh, but probably
there's the bullseye, buddy. There it comes.
Well, it's a mixture, and I think it's a combination of, it depends on how people interpret the data, and I think that what people should pay attention to is that amongst extremely enthusiastic voters, Trump is in exceptional shape in the Rust Belt.
So of those, 51.2% are extremely enthusiastic. He leads Biden 52.9 to 45. That is almost 8 points in extremely enthusiastic. It's big. It's big.
And to give people an idea of how I interpret when we have good, reliable polling data, like what big data is doing, what you're doing, then I use that I did this actually with the exit polls, to give you an example. And the exit polls have problems with weighting, but their internals can be okay. It's how they manipulate the weighting. To give people a story, on election night, I was contacted by several friends who had early access to the exit poll data while I was over in Dublin, telling me I had to get out of the betting markets right away. And I said, why don't you send me the data? And so they sent me the data. And I looked at the internals, and what I was looking for were, did the internals match what I expected? So amongst non-college whites in particular, certain areas, certain parts of the country. And in fact, it was pointing to exactly what I had forecast. like about 2 months before. And so once I saw it, I was like, this is great. And I wrote them back and I said, I'm going to put everything else I have left in it on the election, which they thought I was crazy for. Then I went to sleep.
Yeah, they're like, get out.
Yeah, exactly.
Get out.
Because they didn't understand so for something like this, I take what Richard did. I take the extreme enthusiasm and I make that 3/4 of the vote. And then of the other half of the electorate, I make them 1/4 of the vote, weighting them differently depending on how likely they were to vote and the rest. And from that, I come up with a number of what I think the projected outcome is going to be. And basically, by my looking at what your poll showed, what the epic, I'm still not going to get it right.
Epoch. I did. Laura like trained me with this, so she got it right. Every time I said it wrong, she was like, epoch, because she didn't want me to say the poll wrong. You know,
right? Of course, epoch. So for what I read from the Epoch Times poll is that effectively, if I were using that information and data and projecting out onto the election day, I have Trump winning the Rust Belt by 5. So doing about 2.5 to 3 points, depending on how you measure it, better than he did in 2016.
I was just going to tell people, for the ones who don't know, Robert, he got 48.5% of the total vote in these 6 states. She got 46. So 2.5. So what Robert's saying is he'll do about 2 points better. That's what, just so people understand, because they look at that 6 and they're like, oh my God, he's getting creamed. Well, not really. That 6 turns out to, and Iowa is not as good for him as Ohio. Ohio's big for him. It's like Ohio's looking like 8 points right now. Iowa is only about 3, which I went back and looked for him in 2016. PBD on October 24th in 2016, it was only Iowa Trump +2. So it's really, I'm like, we tend to look at the finals on everything and compare. That's really not accurate way of doing it.
The rural ethnic vote there, I project out differently. So all I'm looking for in places like Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, by any poll, is for Trump just to be within firing distance. In particular, I think Norwegians are tough to poll, and some of those voters, whether it's because they're it's called Norwegian nice in Wisconsin.
Yeah,
it's just a demeanor that you're not going to get the most accurate data from until late. It just for whatever reason. And give you an example. I mean, I was arguing with someone the other day about Wisconsin polling accuracy. And it's like go back to, for people to understand the significance of the Norwegian vote and the northern working class anti-war vote, which also has sort of a Yankee, French, Canadian component in places like northern New Hampshire and northern Maine. Go back and contrast 2000 to 2004 election results, because there you had W run 2.5 points better than in 2004 and in 2000, but it was not uniform. And the places that rebelled against him were twofold. One was the beginning of the culture war. So W had a huge spike in evangelical support, both in terms of turnout and enthusiasm and in terms of actual vote share. But and he had a decline in high secular areas. So very metropolitan centers saw him lose votes. But otherwise, like in Wisconsin, Gallup consistently predicted W was going to win by 8 points.
Yeah.
ABC, which has its own, one of the last times they ever polled Wisconsin, they have, I think, 10-point lead or something for Biden. Well, that was their lead for W, 10 points. On election night, it was within 1/4 of a point. So how did they get Wisconsin wrong? Well, if you saw what happened in Minnesota and the Dakotas and Montana, and between 2000 and 2004, you could predict it. And the same thing as I've been talking about before on here, if you just track Norwegian support, if you looked at, say, Steele County, eastern North Dakota. If you looked at there's counties in Minnesota that had not voted Republican since 1960 until Trump. What stands out about those counties is that they're Norwegian. Now they're Norwegian Protestant. So that's why they were voting for Nixon in 1960.
Yeah.
Catholic
very different.
I'm not so sure about that. For folks who don't know, 1960 was a massive religious divide because it was the first ever Catholic potential president. So the Norwegian voters are very anti-war. That goes back to the early 1900s. They were accused of being anti-American because of their opposition to World War I. You go back and look the political legacy of guys like Senator Nye from North Dakota, also came from the Norwegian tradition, grew up in Wisconsin before he went to North Dakota. North Dakota is a big Norwegian population in the eastern part of the state. And he was the guy who led the war profiteering committees, the anti-war groups. All of that was him. So they have a long history of being anti-war, and it showed up in 2000 and 2004. Wisconsin's great because the whole state splits. The western part of the state is heavily Norwegian. W lost votes. In fact, as many as he dropped as much as double digits amongst Norwegian voters, such that he lost 3 to 4 points in almost all the counties in the West between 2000 and 2004. But he grew by almost 3 to 4 points in the Fox River Valley and in the eastern side of the state that's not heavily Norwegian, that has both pockets of evangelicals and your militaristic, patriotic types. So, like, the genius of Trump has been to combine the sort of tough guy, macho, patriotic, urban ethnic, who tends to be Italian and Polish and Irish in places like South Philly and the rest. He combined them with your Norwegian and rural and French Canadian and old Yankee anti-war populations. No one really has successfully done that in the history of the United States, frankly, to get both of those groups enthusiastically backing him. That was always the combination of, we're going to kick the hell out of ISIS, and then we're going to get the heck out of there.
And then we're going to leave. Yep. We're going to bomb the beep out of them.
And then we're gone.
Which the media flips out about, and they just don't understand that he's talking to like every ethnic Catholic and
odds with each other to be united against the foreign policy establishment. So if you look at what the internals of your poll are showing, what other data points are showing, Norwegians are going to trend heavy towards Trump. It means Minnesota and Wisconsin will be safer than Michigan or Pennsylvania. I think it'll show up late in Iowa. I think he'll end up winning Iowa by 6-7 points. I don't think it'll be as big as
there may be. Yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought. I was going to add to that.
Iowa tends to swing a lot more. Iowa doesn't tend to stay as consistent as other states do. But the same thing there. Iowa didn't break until late. They didn't report it. And again, it's my take from that has always been that even good pollsters have struggled. Like Seltzer does a good job with Iowa. Or national poll is much more shaky.
Robert, that tanking that poll got me. And you know how I feel about Ann. But look, for those who are younger in the industry, she's a great person to look up to. That tanking that Des Moines poll, man.
And for those who don't know, that's the Democratic nomination poll this last cycle, which
even Patrick Murray,
Biden, and Buttigieg, and would have boosted Bernie substantially for a chance at the nomination.
The explanation is, I'm not a big cursor, on air anyway. I got a filthy mouth off air. But for those who don't know, even Patrick Murray from the Monmouth poll, the explanation was bullshit. There was no reason why those responses couldn't have been dumped and replaced. I mean, we were not talking about days in the field. We were talking about one interviewer supposedly may have cut off Buttigieg's name. Guys, in a live caller setting, in a caddy setting, that caller may have called 20 people. I mean, maybe. I mean, so this is like a total joke. She spiked the poll out of pressure by the media outlet, and that is a big no. I don't know if I can ever come back with this one. With that, Robert. I really don't know if I can come back with her.
Now, for her, in defense of her, she didn't make the ultimate call there.
That's true, but you got to fight for that, Robert. You got to fight for that.
And she may have. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me too much. We'll see if I think she's going to be off in Iowa this year, she was off in all of 2016 until the very end. She was off for almost all of 2014.
That's true.
Until the very end.
That's
off
true.
In 2010 and in some polls until the end. So it's not like
it was off in 2020.
Late polls, and especially someone who knows Iowa as well as she does, she should know which groups. Like that's where I was looking at.
Late.
The internals, looking at certain rural areas, looking at certain enthusiasm, looking at areas where certain ancestries are strong, and that tells me more. So, I mean, that's when I looked at. Basically, it says the Rust Belt poll update is Iowa's pretty safe, Ohio's very safe,
it's very safe.
Pennsylvania's leaning Trump, and he's very competitive in the other three states. And if you looked at the numbers I'm looking at, which are Macomb and Monroe in Michigan, I'm looking at the Iron Range and down in Rochester in Minnesota. Looking at certain rural parts of Wisconsin, the fact that he's like down a little or even in the southwestern part of the state, well, he slightly lost that part of the state in 2016.
Right.
Depending on how you count it. The Madison bleeds over into some of the suburbs. But some of those rural counties used to be the Democratic anchor. I mean, to give people an idea, any Norwegian part of the upper Midwest had voted almost a Democrat for almost every election since 1964, including even voting for people like McGovern, voting for people, voting for Mondale, voting for Dukakis. I always called him Michael Do Kick My Ass because of his bad campaign.
The horrible candidate.
Oh, completely.
He looked great on paper, the image of him. He looked presidential, and then it's just
what
fell
people
apart.
missed was that the blue wall was solely an anti-war wall.
Yeah,
because what happened was in 2000, it was not much different than the rest of the country.
That's
Minnesota
right.
was very close. Wisconsin
Almost went for Bush.
Exactly.
Almost went very close.
It was the war rallied the Norwegians back to the Democratic side of the equation, and Romney was more. Obama was more anti-war than both McCain and Romney by a long mile, and so it was deceptive that the area being perceived as a blue wall. What your polling data confirms is that that's gone. So that you're not.
St. Louis is going to go. You're right. You were right about that. It's going to go. I mean, it's not even close.
And people don't know that's St. Louis County. It's Duluth. That's the heart of the Iron Range. Yeah. And just that area flipping and the scope to which they're flipping, because now you've confirmed what other polls have also shown.
20 points.
Exactly. Yeah. He lost it by 12. He may win it by 10 or more. When you get a 20-point plus flip in that area, and it's, that alone makes up more than half of the vote he needs. And then you just get a turnout differential. And that's what's going to happen is all across the state, your core Trump people are going to vote, and a lot of your core Biden people are not. That's why a registered voter poll. Well, how could it be for people that are asking, how do I say a registered voter poll that says Biden by 6 is actually going to be Trump by 5? It's because that 20 to 25% of the registered voters who don't vote would otherwise vote for Biden by 40 to 50 points. That's why.
We're looking at 14%, Robert, for 18 to 29. That's it. Oh, yeah. They're not going to vote.
Catalyst is a Democratic voter file organization. That's what they had for 2016. So you're seeing these ABC poll came out, and it said that about a third of the electorate in Wisconsin and Michigan was going to be less than 30 years of age.
It's crazy.
That's how they're getting those crazy numbers. So when you adjust for what an actual likely voter model is going to be, and I just put a heightened category on enthusiasm more so than most. And I did that because when I was trying to figure out why my election betting model works so consistently, I realized that it was actually there in the data in 2012. There was a massive enthusiasm gap amongst particularly low propensity voters. In other words, if you have a bunch of upper middle class voters on one side or the other that are more excited than the other, doesn't matter at all because they always vote. Your professional class person, your master's degree person, they're 95, 100% voting. The voter group,
they're coming out always.
Exactly. The disparity you care about is the racial gap, the age gap, and the socioeconomic gap, and then the partisan gap. So even amongst working class voters, Trump's working class supporters, white working class supporters, are twice as enthused as Biden's white working class supporters. What does that mean is going to happen? Biden's working class voters are not going to vote in a good number of these counties. So I think you'll only see a turnout increase comparable to 12 to 16, just with the population effectively, 137 to 145 million. But what's going to happen for everybody out there is that 145 million is going to be different in its sub-constituent categories than the 137 was. In particular, you're going to have even fewer Democratic voters turn out in 2020 than turned out in 2016 proportionately. And that's how W can be down by a point or two with a typical likely voter screen and win by almost 3 points. Obama could be down by a point or two with a traditional likely voter screen,
right?
Win by 4 points. That 5 or 6 point gap is made up by who decides to vote. And so that's where, and a lot of that
small changes can make an enormous difference. This is what we should do that one day. Go into market site because you've seen this. The teeniest little change in weighting. All right, well, 18 to 29 was 16% in whatever year. What happens if they drop to 14%? Folks, it can make an enormous difference. And we're not just talking about party, because we didn't wait for party here.
It's
we
also
didn't wait for party.
It's not just that it's
the target was on
14% instead of 30. It's that portion of that 30 that's not turning up are massively Biden voters.
That's right.
So that's the key for people to understand. So Trump's happy to have a young Trump voter vote. So it's all about who votes. And right now, I think you'll see about a 4 to 5 point gap. I mean, it came out on a Spectator. The UK publication had some people on that were connected to Trump's campaign team. And apparently they have this is at least their own internals, which is not that Trump's up, not that polling part of the team, but other people have said that Trump's view is that as long as he's down by less than 5 or 6 in a state, then he's going to win. So that his goal is just to be down by less than 5 or 6 because he's already internally calculated in his head.
Yeah. And there's an argument for that. I can see that argument. I can. And you know why?
Similar to 04 and 2012.
In Minnesota alone, and I sent you on a message. I said, you got to read this because there was an outlet. Many people probably did not see any polling from in 2016 because the media, like me, they thought, it's a panel poll, and they dismissed it. It was Poll Smart, MR, all right? And they were dead on in 2016, even honestly, closer in their national numbers, they were closer than we were, all right? And I don't know that they polled states, but they released this poll that like mirrors what we found. And what they have is Biden up over Trump in registered voters by like 3 point something, but then in the likely voter, it's nothing. It's 1.2 nationally. Why? Because they found something that we found. This is always weird for people who know women vote at higher rates typically than men, and there are more women in the population than men, especially in the Rust Belt. Wisconsin could go. It is legitimate that Wisconsin could at least be 50-50 male, female. And we could be wrong about that. Right now, we have it at 48-52. And men they're juiced. They are the most juiced. And they are going to be, I think, they are going to be a higher share of the electorate than they typically are. That's exactly what this pollster came up with. All right. That a likely voter screen, like Robert is talking about before, a traditional likely voter, they're just looking at maybe some of their self-reporting, but then weighing it against vote history and saying, this group doesn't vote. This guy doesn't vote. He never votes. He's gone. He's screened out. But in truth, he is going to vote. And this is what took them by surprise in 2016. Only I think it could happen at a bigger rate this time because there are a lot more men in these areas that are telling us they're going to vote, and they don't always vote. They definitely in Minnesota, they definitely did not go out and vote in 2018. And the Trump campaign was making hay over this group of men. And I was telling, look, I'm listening to it and I'm like, bull, bull. They're just, that's the machinations of a campaign that's missing some voters, but it's legit. The point is, the argument is legit. And I kept this question on the screen because before I race off into the other direction about this, the point being that a likely voter from media poll will probably screen those voters out, and then that will have an enormous impact. But to answer this question, I just want to circle back before Iowa. I was looking at it, and I would have thought Iowa would have been like Trump plus 8. It was only a couple of months ago where it was Trump plus 10. And so being that it's closer now, people, that was one of the first things they did. Well, that looks like Iowa is closer than Ohio. That can't be. Actually, until 2016, Iowa routinely voted to the left of Ohio, folks. Routinely. It went for Gore in 2000. It barely went for Bush by 10,000 votes when Ohio went by 2.8 points.
And the same dynamic. To go back to that 2000-2004 gap really is educational because you'll see Ohio, Illinois, all these states voted more for W in 2004 than they did in 2000, but not states like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, New Hampshire, Maine, all those. So the vote that's hard in my calculation by looking at it historically to get is your anti-war voter group constituencies.
They don't always show up.
Or if they do, they just don't. They often don't show up in the polls. And I think it's because of Norwegian nice diplomatic culture. I think they tend not to speak out or give their opinions until late. And so because that's why there's a long history of missing whenever that voter group.
I've been arguing that too. You're right.
Distinct voter trend. Historically, they have not been picked up in most polls. And this goes to this goes over 25 years of polling.
Even us, Robert, look at this. You remember 2016, October 24th, Michigan was still Clinton plus 5. I mean, Iowa was that day was only Trump +3 that same day. You remember this. And I was saying it in 2016. This group of voters is not deciding right away. It artificially inflates, and it's not just Biden, it artificially inflates any Democrat number, right? Because it looks like and on that day, Pennsylvania was Clinton +3. Right now, Biden doesn't even have that 3 points in Pennsylvania. And I'm not sure he does at all. I think it's possible that, larger samples may have caught something else, but Bucks County's 49-47. I saw the Republican poll that they released showing Fitzpatrick up by 16. I don't know about that. If you look at it, Trump's got a 2-point lead. The Republican has a 4-point lead, generic ballot Republican in Bucks County. That, to me, I thought it was going to be Biden +3 or Biden +4 or something, but it wasn't.
If he was in good stead, and the other way to think of it is whatever votes Biden has, he has. Anybody who's claiming to be undecided or is parking their vote for people who don't know what I mean by parking their vote, an easy way for someone who doesn't really want to either answer to themselves, answer to a stranger, that they're going to vote for Trump. And often it's entering into themselves because I've been trying. It's fascinating watching. I have a wide circle of friends and family from a wide set of political beliefs and life experiences, and particularly working class women have been flipping towards Trump, who are very anti-Trump 4 months ago, were convinced they were going to vote Democrat, are already slowly convincing themselves why they're not going to vote Democrat. By the way, they just give me their updates every now and then whenever I run into them. And it's different reasonings, but it goes back to my theory, which is everybody makes up their mind a year in advance. They just don't always admit it to themselves, but it shows up in behavior. It shows up in presidential primary participation, voter registration, party self-identification, yard signs, rally size, TV ratings, which YouTube channels are doing well, which ones are not, social media, Twitter. I mean, here's the example. Whichever president has dominated the Google search engines since Google search has become a factor in 2004 has won the election. Well, Trump is dominating at a level that's never been seen before. So people only search for Trump. Almost nobody searches for Biden, even though Trump is a known factor. And it was 3-1, 4-1. People Google searches are Trump rather than Biden. To give people an idea, that was 2-1, which was a sign, or about 60% in 2016 for Trump, which was similar to what Obama had. In 2008, he had more like 2/3. And it all ended up being indicators. We don't have our Halloween mask test yet. We won't have that until then.
Not yet.
Everybody knows there's going to be more Trump Halloween masks than Biden masks. There's only so much creepy Uncle Joe that works as a Halloween mask. And for people who don't know, whoever has won the Halloween mask debate has won the election. That was whoever more people pick to have a Halloween mask of is actually the winner in every presidential election since that measurement has been taken. So all of the measurements of enthusiasm, excitement, interest, intensity lean heavily towards Trump. Like, if I was in Biden's camp, I would want that extreme enthusiasm gap to be within the margin of error, 3 to 4 points, not have it at 7, 8, 10, depending on where you're at.
That's why the more I poll, the more it's really obvious why they are doing this with mail-in ballots. And speaking to the New York Post this morning about this, it's clear. If it was going to be a normal election, Robert, like where everybody goes out to election day, he would never get those people out. They need extra time to gather up these ballots. I'm not saying there's not enough out there to outvote. Obviously, there's the register voter poll, and that explains it. Because they can't do a day or two, or just even traditional in-person early votes. They need more time because they are afraid of being in the position Hillary Clinton was at 9:30 in Pennsylvania on election night. They're looking at the results, 95% reporting. There's nothing left in Philadelphia, and that's it. It's over because he still has votes trickling in from Western. By the way, Erie County, I forgot to bring this up. Erie County, this way, give me 2 seconds. Let me look this up. I looked at it just before I came on.
I like Erie County.
14 points, Robert. It's like 14 points or 12 points or something. It's big, and Erie was a large sample.
Erie's a good, because for everybody out there, polling is just a way to try to talk to one person to project the opinions of 100,000.
Right.
So I like certain subcategories of certain identified constituencies.
Let me get the actual number.
Historically predictive. And the reason why I like Erie County is because half of Erie County is ethnic Catholic. It's a combination of Italian,
Right.
Irish, and Polish. And it tells me how that voter group is likely going to vote throughout Pennsylvania, throughout large parts of Michigan, throughout places like Milwaukee and Wisconsin, and Kenosha and Racine and Johnstown. So it tells me how a lot of those places are going to go. And so it's very helpful. I'm already confident that the Norwegian influence is going to carry Trump in Minnesota and probably Wisconsin and Iowa. But for the urban ethnic group that's key to Michigan and Pennsylvania, places like Erie, you might not think, well, why use Erie, Pennsylvania to measure Michigan? It's because that working class ethnic in Erie tells you what you're going to get likely out of Macomb and Monroe. And when all three align, they're telling you a story.
It's actually bigger among That's one weird area where the margin is bigger among registered voters than it is with likely. Overall, we don't see that picture, but in Erie, it is. And we're looking at it's 13 points. That's what it is. But in the registered voter, it's
what did
16.
What did he win?
He won it by 2 points. Barack Obama won Erie County by 16 points with Joe Biden on the ballot. In 2012, he beat Mitt Romney there like a red-headed stepchild, man. And 16 points.
That's similar to what you found in Macomb and Monroe.
Right. So why aren't these moving back? It's totally not the same as 2016, guys. That's my point. It's like
there'll be a professional class uptick for Biden.
Right.
There'll be lower, I think, African-American turnout for Biden, which like when I was telling, some people were saying, how is it possible Trump could get 15%, say, of the African-American vote?
Which he is.
And it's hard to measure that typically because your African-American precincts are more Democratic. In other words, the ones that are 95% African-American, those are more inner city precincts.
He's running that stuff up in some of it's urban, but he's running it up in working class areas. These are Black working people. That's what,
And what is a lot of your Black Republican votes will come in precincts that are not 95% African-American.
That's right.
But the way you measure it is if you're going to get, say, 15% of the African-American vote in general, what you'll get is you'll see something like 7 to 8%, 9%, high single digits in the core inner city precincts. But the way that often happens isn't necessarily that you increased your voter share. It's just that the opponent didn't turn out.
Yeah.
And that happened partially in 2012 and 2016, as you've noted. In Detroit alone, the decline in turnout is what, and I've told people it was a combination of lower turnout amongst Black working class men and the shift in support from Romney, the dramatic, about 7, 8, up to 10 point increase amongst Black working class men that Trump got over Romney. That actually decided. When people wanted to make the racism argument, I was like, it's because of Black working class men he won Wisconsin. It's because of Black working class men he won Michigan. It's because
on the margins.
He won Pennsylvania. Because without that increase, without just the change in just that one group, he loses all 3 states. So because in Pennsylvania, it's a much higher share. It's about 11, 12% of the vote is African.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And so I think the fact that you're seeing Erie and Macomb and Monroe trend a certain direction, in rural Iowa, rural Minnesota, rural parts of rural western Wisconsin trend in a certain direction, all tells me that Trump is in excellent, excellent shape, which may be a good bridge to the discussion of the one way he could screw it up by making a poor SCOTUS nomination choice.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to wrap up what you're saying, look at this is the likely voters, no undecided. His Black vote share goes up from about 17 to about 19. In Pennsylvania, it's 20. And for those who doubt me, George W. Bush won 18% of the Black vote in Pennsylvania. I am right. I am telling you, I am right. And they are you can't win places like Erie like that without plucking off a few minority votes here and there, because it's just not enough. Like, you can't turn your white vote share out that much where it juices and makes an 18-point swing. There has to be something else going on there. But I am with Robert on this. So somebody asked the question before, what does this mean? And then you can see, by the way, the white vote share goes from almost tied in the Rust Belt to Trump up among likely voters. That's the difference. All right, likely white voters. All right, but Robert is all about making a minority pick. All right, whereas most, let's call it the conventional wisdom, says that Trump should pick Amy Coney Barrett because Barrett is a very typical suburban white Catholic woman. One that you would think with an highly educated. All right. So the general idea is if you pick somebody like that, then let Democrats trash her so the white suburban women can see how they really view them. All right. That is, look, I think both cases have an argument, but I tend to lean with Robert on this because you have the potential for defectors in the Republican Party. You make them look more ridiculous by denying like the first Cuban Hispanic woman on a seat on the Supreme Court. And also there are some, Barrett's got some cases where you may love her if your issue is about abortion. But if it's not and you're thinking about like civil libertarian issues, you may not love her that much when you start to dig into her record. All right. So it's a matter of it's a matter of what's the word I'm looking for? A matter of preference. Yeah. Preference. But I don't think either way, Robert, because the question somebody asked before, can this help? The voters that we were just talking about in Iowa, in Wisconsin, they almost give artificial edges in polling to Democratic candidates because they break late. This Supreme Court issue could take away some of what they kind of felt comfortable. The economy was doing better. It's coming back. They had like the luxury of making a decision based on whether or not they view themselves to be virtuous or, moral for voting for someone like Donald Trump. In 2016, this very issue made him the obvious choice in Iowa. This very issue made him the obvious choice in places in Wisconsin that look more like Iowa than they ever will in Michigan, right? And so those voters have, I don't know if the word is sour, but they will weigh voting for Biden. In fact, some of them may be soft Biden voters right now. But when it's all on the line and you have to decide whether or not you're pro-life or not, you're pro-religious freedom or not, when it's all on the line, you take that luxury away from them, right? So this is what I think this is going to help. I went back and looked over the weekend, Robert. There's no election where the Supreme Court pick dominating the headlines helped the left. I couldn't find one. In 2008, that really wasn't the issue. You could, with Obama being, able to get 2 picks, that wasn't the issue. The issue was the war and the issue was the economy. That was a very loose issue. The liberals who vote on Roe v. Wade vote all the damn time anyway, right? It's those others that you need to persuade and then get out to the ballot box because there's like a current threat to their way of life or something, really, I couldn't find one comparable. Like 16, this was a big issue, man, for people who don't know. Trump killed it among voters who Supreme Court was their issue. He killed it.
Yeah. And I think basically it's a twofold approach politically. One is who can he get through the Senate because of the political consequences of that. And there was independent. And then the second one is how does the confirmation battle influence voters in election day? Because he needs a 5th justice on the Supreme Court to deal with the election litigation risk exposure that he, as you note, uniquely faces. So you have a situation where Michigan and Pennsylvania judges are becoming activists and changing the rules of the election on the eve of the election to facilitate Democratic ability to maximize voter turnout when they lack enthusiasm. The significance of the Rust Belt poll is registered voters. If everybody votes, Biden wins. If only the enthusiastic voters vote, Trump wins easily. That means that they need to arbitrarily and artificially inflate turnout on the Democratic side of the aisle. And the way they're going to do so is by having maximum ballot harvesting, as well as maximum amounts of voter participation through mail-in balloting. And so that combination is meant to answer their problem that they otherwise face and otherwise confront, which is a lack of enthusiasm. So the only way they can really win at this stage by the polling data that Richard has is to get an artificial turnout. And the only way they get that is by these courts issuing these crazy rulings that allow ballots to be counted weeks after election day, allow them to be harvested by random people. And why does harvesting matter? Harvesting matters the way absentee balloting is built in. It has all these procedural safeguards. I, as a voter, have to request it. What does that mean? It means a ballot will not go out to someone who's dead or has moved. Second, I have to be the one to sign it without, and sometimes witnessed, but not have outside external control. The person notarizes or approves or witnesses that this was that I signed it, and two, and that the ballot that was sent back was the one I signed, and that no one put any pressure on me or tried to bribe me for that ballot.
Right.
When you allow massive mail-in balloting, you send out ballots to people who are dead. You send out ballots to people who have moved. You send out ballots to people who may have not requested it and have no interest in voting.
Change of name.
Exactly. So that's risk factor number one. Risk factor number two is that that it can be coerced. It can be bought. As people sit there and look and check, okay, did you vote for Biden? Okay, now you sign here. Now give it to me and I'll return it. This is the problem of a combination of waiving witnessing requirements, waiving request requirements, waiving the person having to deliver it or send it in themselves, and then you compound that with being able to return a ballot up to 2 weeks after election day.
It's crazy.
And you're almost guaranteed to get a ballot box stacking going on. The only thing that protects Trump right now is two things. One is it's much harder to pull this off in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa than it is in Ohio, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. What's helping him in Ohio is his margins are likely going to be so substantial that they can't steal it. So that means in order to successfully steal Michigan and Pennsylvania, here's what's likely going to happen. They won't even try to steal Michigan and Pennsylvania if Trump wins Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. If he's won it anyway, they're not going to gamble problems on stealing electoral votes that don't matter.
Which we know from that indictment in Philadelphia happened in 2016, Robert. We know that. He was running away that night and they stopped stuffing, man. It says right in the indictment. Come on, guys. I mean, come on.
Yeah, this is not brain surgery. I know people like Sabato at Crystal Ball. No, not Crystal Ball. Yeah, maybe that's it. Well, what's the university?
Yeah, the Center for Politics in Virginia,
yes.
for University of Virginia.
Long lecture. He studied it in detail, and he'd never found a single meaningful instance of voter fraud. I'm like, pal,
that's ridiculous.
Wrong places. Because years ago, I ran a mayor's campaign, Chattanooga, a Democrat against another Democrat. Though it was a nonpartisan election, and I suspected that and I used actual voter data techniques that voter fraud experts have used to be able to figure out when voter fraud has occurred. Look at 2017 Alabama. Almost no doubt that Senate race had voter fraud in it. And by the way, I set out.
Oh wait, Minnesota. We wouldn't even have Obamacare if it wasn't for voter fraud in Minnesota.
Yeah, in the Senate. So if you look at, and I actually set out in 2017 to prove the voter fraud allegations false in Alabama.
Yeah.
And I told people, here's how you do it. I've been trained to do it over 25 years. And what it came back was the methods I said would prove voter fraud came out in abundance. And to give you just an example, you'll take two constituencies that are within the same county that are similar politically and ideologically and demographically, and you look for unusual turnout, because the biggest way you have voter fraud is you just put in a bunch of ballots of people who didn't actually vote. Now, you don't need to change people's ballots. A lot of times that's what voter fraud experts are looking at. That's not what happens. It's false ballots get put in. That's
right. Yeah. Which is very difficult to look at later on. So you're going to chase down all these people and ask them is that your signature? Did you do this?
Well, not only that, particularly like if you have
realistic.
Oh, correct. And the way you do it is you control the precincts. Obama let this out of the bag in 2008. He's like,
he sure did.
He's like, you got to control the precincts to do voter fraud. That's really hard. I was like, it's not in Chicago, but he's right. It was hard for one person to do it without the complicity of the precinct chairman. But you have your precinct person just checks off a bunch of people as voting that day who didn't, sticks in a bunch of ballots in their name, and proving otherwise. But how it shows up is because voter fraud happens at a precinct level for the most part. It's hard to have it be uniform. It's hard to cheat in every single precinct in the state. So what will happen is you'll see unusual discrepancies between precincts. And that's what happened in Birmingham. You go to two African-American precincts, both on the lower income side of the scale, both of the same political preferences, both tend to turn out at the same rate in elections. And one of them turned out at 65% of the presidential election rate. And the one next door turned out at over 90%.
Yeah,
that happened, folks. One precinct was busy sticking the ballots, and because every judge in the state of Alabama pretty much hates Roy Moore, no one was going to listen when he complained. And that's
we saw that Broward County would have failed that test in 2016 as well. So
absolutely.
the one place in
Chuck
Florida,
Todd was on, NBC signaling, he's like, we're waiting for Broward. Maybe Broward can make up is it Broward?
Come on, Brenda.
Could we make up the votes? And they're like, oh no, there's too many of them. It'll be obvious. So that's the key. But going back to the Supreme Court side, the other side of that aisle to deal with voter fraud risk for Trump means that, let's say for whatever happens, he doesn't win Wisconsin or Minnesota or whatever. If it comes down to Michigan or Pennsylvania or both, then voter fraud litigation is going to be off the charts. And that means he needs 5 justices with him on the Supreme Court.
Right.
And Justice Roberts cannot be depended upon. So that means he needs a nominee to go through, because that's my argument to my conservative friends arguing for more of a purist. Aside from my deep skepticism that you can figure out who's going to be a purist in advance, just look at the 200 plus years.
Right.
Pointing, Eisenhower did not. Eisenhower was cussing out the civil rights justices that he appointed for decades later.
Right.
That was not his intention. He was like, Earl Warren, he locked up the Japanese. How is he creating all these problems for him? He was in California.
You're lectured by this SOB, man.
Exactly. And then, he put Brennan on the bench. I mean, some of your, of course, Bobby Bush put Souter on the bench. So predicting that is a crapshoot, because everybody that wants to become a judge has learned to keep their mouth shut about what their political viewpoints are. If you game it very effectively, don't trust someone who's gone out of their way to say they're pro-life. Because that's what Justice Roberts did. Roberts always wanted to be on the Supreme Court, so he hinted he was strongly pro-life. What did he do?
Touted his Catholic teaching. He touted being taught, but being educated in the Catholic system,
like Barrett is doing. So don't trust anyone. I don't trust anyone who tries to clerk for a Supreme Court justice. They're playing politics. They convince that justice to vouch for them with the entire intellectual legal academy of that political side of the aisle, and that's that Roberts' combination was that, plus going out around and telling people and dropping hints that he was pro-life. I much more trust someone who doesn't talk about their abortion position on the conservative side, because honestly, that means they're more likely to be pro-life, because they're just trying to hide it and mask it.
That's a good point. That's a good point, folks. Think about it in that way.
Exactly. So so he needs that 5th justice. So my argument to my conservative friends is, would you be willing to put someone up that may not get nominated, that will leave Trump screwed on the in such that he can't win re-election, even if he legitimately won it, because the Supreme Court doesn't back him up, because Roberts does his flippity flop.
He will. Exactly.
That's who he is. And then you're going to have Joe Biden picking the next, at least Breyer will for sure, likely Thomas. He's going to get 2 more justices. So and not only that, he'll get the 3rd justice, because we would have lost the nomination in the first place for the replacement of Ginsburg. I was like, do you want a Democrat to pick 3 justices? Because that's the risk you're taking if you pick anybody who does not have the best shot at getting confirmed by this Senate. So that's why my view of, I agree with all the people on the right that say identity politics should not govern our choices. I'm empathetic with that position. Not as much as they are. I think life history matters. But we live in an environment where it is going to matter in the U.S. Senate, and it is going to matter in the media. Yes. So you can't ignore that and live in la-la land, stick your head in the sand and pretend it's going to be something else, or you risk 3 Democratic justices coming down over the next 4 years, rather than having 3 Trump justices coming down over the next 4 years.
Robert, that argument, and also the argument that, Axios did something very dishonest over the weekend. So, they put it out, I think it was this morning, or maybe they put it out yesterday. All the days bleed together for me. But if Republicans do this, Democrats will declare total war, they say now, and they'll put 2 more justices on the court. They'll add 2 more Senate seats in the U.S. Senate. Robert, this is a load of crap. They are going to do this anyway. And Trump and Republicans, I don't think voters in Iowa and Wisconsin think it's a good idea to take 2 senators from the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, because they plan to do this. Somehow we got through this entire election cycle without talking about it, because the media is so corrupt. They hid this from the American people. The only one I heard say anything about it was Martha McSally, and she got mocked badly. She said it like impromptu in an interview in local Arizona television. Then they mocked her for it. Oh, it's just great. It is not. Anybody who's in DC knows they're doing this, folks. They are doing this. They're going to try to pack the court like FDR did, and they're going to try to expand the U.S. Senate so you could never see a Republican Senate again. So
Exactly.
two more with DC.
They want to stack the U.S. Supreme Court.
They do. They're going to do it if they get
appeals because they want to add hundreds of new judicial appointments. They want to stack the federal district court system.
Yep.
They want mass amnesty for illegals to come into the country and those that are here to vote. So their goal is to stack as soon as they get power again. They are going to stack the odds institutionally and structurally so that they have complete control and carte blanche moving forward. That's why this Supreme Court choice nominee is critical. It's because he needs to get it through to protect himself from the risk of election fraud. And that's why it cannot be someone who can be easily picked apart. And knowing here your audience is different. Your audience is not so much the court of public opinion. Your audience is 53 Republican senators.
That's right. Right.
And for that, here's the thing. If the reality is for all of them, they are sensitive to issues of identity politics, particularly Collins running for re-election in a tough race.
I was just going to say,
because she's Murkowski, comes from a long, notoriously corrupt family in Alaska, but that's another story. Romney, because he wants to be the Virtue Signaler Award winner of the year every year on the New York Times side of the equation. And then you add Gardner, who's in a close race, also in a liberal Democratic state that's trending liberal and Democratic. So
your pick for Gardner.
Yeah, any of those four.
If very easy for two white women to block the nomination of a white woman to the Supreme Court. I just got to say, I got to agree on it because they do. Whether you think it's right to think about identity politics or like that is really irrelevant. They do in the United States. And
he needs that to win the election, or put it this way, to have his win of the election actually validated and verified. He needs a Supreme Court justice on that bench before Election Day. So any risk that of those four senators rejecting him creates too much risk. And so and that's where so that's problem one. Problem two is how the narrative would shape out. My friends on the religious right tend to be in a kind of bubble that my friends on the secular left tend to be on when it comes to these issues. The secular left thinks the whole country hates religious people. Religious folks think the religious right often thinks any criticism of their person is a criticism of God, a criticism of their religion, a criticism of their church. Neither is accurate when it comes to the swing voter in the Midwest. Now, what the swing voter in the Midwest, they don't want any part of Netflix cuties world. They don't want part of he, she, Z, X with Latina X. They don't want anything to do with any of that nonsense. At the same time, they don't want to be preached to. This is why the Republicans that have done well in the Midwest are Republicans are Californians like Reagan and Nixon, are New Yorkers like Trump and Eisenhower. They're not your preachy types. They're not your Pat Robertsons. They're not your Ted Cruzes. They're not even your Mike Pences. So they're not your over-the-top sort of strong people that are strongly religious conservative base, but the working class North tends to be disproportionately. A lot of them are Catholic, but they're non-observant Catholic.
Right.
There's a lot of still animosity towards the way the Catholic Church has handled different things over the last 50 years, which includes anything from liberal activism to the pedophilia scandals. So they're not lockstep in with the church. Your religiously observant voter that's Catholic is already going to vote Republican that cares about pro-life. They're not going to change based on who Trump nominates. There'll be some enthusiasm that can help there, some fundraising that can help there. But for that working class Northern voter, Trump needs a nominee that comes across as sensible, not someone who comes across as secretly they're going to take the church and they're going to impose the church on them. Particularly places like Minnesota, for example, in western Wisconsin. Those Norwegian voters, to give you some background, those Norwegian voters, there's more Norwegian Americans than there are people in Norway. But the difference is where those Norwegians came from. So the Norwegians that stayed are disproportionately secular and upper middle class and professional class and the rest. The ones that left were the working class, traditional, the farmers, the religious, particularly for religious reasons, is why they left. And so that's why they're very different. They're very patriotic, but they're anti-war at the same time. They're nationalistic, but not imperialistic. There's a certain, but the other thing is they don't like religious imposition. So they have religiously conservative values, but they don't
Right.
They don't any, and most of them are not pro-Catholic. That's why they voted against Kennedy in 1960. While they were voting Democrat all the way through otherwise, suddenly 1960 pops up and these little counties say, hold on a second. It's not that they're anti-Catholic, it's that they fear state church control. So putting up someone like Barrett, who probably has Opus Dei connections by the way in which her overlaps. He's part of secretive, charismatic religious groups that have these mentorship type things that the media is going to portray as cultish, and even if it's unfair, but it's
that's what they do, right?
It's the reality of it, and they're going to play to fears that are not just upper middle class liberal fears. They're also working class Northerners who don't like state church overlap fears, who don't like the preachy side of republicanism. That's why Trump did so well with the Northern working class. They're like, oh, this guy's perfect. He's reasonable. He's not like those crazy wackos from Hollywood.
Conservatism.
But he's not. There's no way he can preach to me because then he'd have to look in the mirror and preach to himself. It ain't happening. So nobody fears being judged by Donald Trump.
And that's why for those of you who still do not get it, what Robert just said is why that Billy Bush tape just fell flat. I mean, for a couple of days, there were a few people who told us, oh, I don't know, because they just felt like they had to. But then it went right back to the baseline. And by the way, in this poll, Robert, did you take anything away from some of those issues about trade, the impact of NAFTA, fracking? Listen, no, if you want to know why Joe Biden flip-flopped on fracking, which is, I mean, it's a flip-flop. Nobody's going to tell me I didn't hear what I heard with my own ears. Joe Biden raised his hand when he said, who supports a ban on fracking? And then he told the girl on the campaign trail, look into my eyes. I promise you we're going to stop it. But when we polled these states, in Pennsylvania, fracking is the most popular because it kind of looks close when you look at all 6 states. It doesn't look close, but it's closer. But in Pennsylvania, it's like 2-1. All right. And then with the USMCA replacing NAFTA, some of those things we were just talking about, at the end of the day, people don't give a damn when it comes to the actual policy. The use of tariffs. Did you see that in the poll? Do you support or oppose the use of tariffs in trade negotiations with other nations? 75% of voters in these swing, those Macomb County, those other areas. It's like they're almost 3/4 of the electorate. So in those counties, right? And that was 2-1 overall anyway, with a large percent telling us they're unsure, Robert. But you know they're really not unsure, right? I mean,
it's the combination. It's the twofer. In other words, not only is Trump, there are people refocusing on the economy away from coronavirus, and that showed up again in the Rust Belt poll. The economy continues to rise. COVID continues to fall. That pattern is likely to continue accelerated as Big Ten football comes back in a couple of weeks, and partially thanks to Trump. Biden made the mistake of attacking Trump on TV ads, blaming him in the Midwest for no Big Ten football. And now there's going to be Big Ten football, so Biden just looks like an idiot. And great move by Trump, but a big assist from Clay Travis, who does Outkick the Coverage, a mostly sports commentary show, but does some political commentary as well upon occasion, just because he has to these days, because the way politics invades and infects everything around it these days on the left. That was very good information, but it's policy connected to results. So that they connect, that they're for tariffs, that they're anti-China, that they want better trade deals, that they didn't like past trade deals. All of those dynamics, Trump is on the right side, particularly of the enthusiastic swing voter in those locations, as you identify. And they connect that to the economic results. So they're saying fracking equals jobs, and who is for fracking? Trump, who's against Biden. So it's not just economy good, economy bad, voting for that person. It's connected to policies. These voters, the energy issue since the late 1990s has educated a whole group of Democratic voters who are very, particularly if you got into the depths of the people who really know a lot about fracking, that's going to be a 10-1 Trump edge. Because the people who really know about it are in Appalachia. Your middle-class suburban person may be slightly opposed, but really doesn't have much intensity in the issue. The person who's going to vote on that issue is the guy whose job or his friend whose job depends on it, or his family member.
Over 68% of those who support fracking are voting for Donald Trump. Less than a quarter are voting for Joe Biden.
And for people to know, that is in heavily, historically, ancestrally Democratic territory.
And I was just going to say, maybe that explains Yeah, that's right. I was just gonna maybe that absolutely. We didn't go over a lot of these other questions, but really does. So when I look at Erie and I'm like, whoa, what's going on there? That could explain a lot of it. I mean, these people do understand the connection. Appalachia is 54 counties, I believe, in Pennsylvania are classified as Appalachia, and that's where a lot of this, comes into play. Also, they don't, just a few of these questions. The vaccine mandate: do you support or oppose? And this is interesting. Making people get a coronavirus vaccine if it becomes available. About half oppose it, but of those who support forcing people to get a coronavirus vaccine, half of them are Biden voters. That's a little bit scary, And then where is the tariff? 45 support, 41 oppose. US, Mexico, Canada. A lot of people didn't know about that because you're thinking we're talking about those metro voters. They don't really, it's not their life, right? So they're not too sure. So I don't really know. It was about a third, but only 14.4% opposed. They wanted to keep NAFTA. So the point is, did you think USMCA was better, or would you have kept NAFTA and you oppose replacing it? 14%, man, said keep NAFTA. I mean, would have kept NAFTA. So
they've seen and lived the complete disaster that it turned out to be. They vindicated Trump's criticism. And for people who think that was just some political ploy by Trump, Trump was one of the leading critics of NAFTA at the time, back in 93, 94. Oh, my phone's ringing.
Yeah, mine did that before. Some people never. I always tell now how many times I tell people, from this time to this time, even Tuesday through Friday, when Inside the Numbers is on, the same damn people keep calling at 10 o'clock. Like how many times I got to tweet Larry, I'm talking to you, Larry Schweikert. How many times do I got to tell you the show starts at 10 o'clock? And it's like 10:30. There's Larry, sure as hell enough. Hey, you got any new poll results? Like, sure, watch Inside the Numbers, Larry, like everybody else, right? Exactly. Oh, speaking of which, real quick, because it's already 3:20, real quick, we haven't even been pushing this thing, right? What I tell people, the link is in the YouTube explanation area if you want to, contribute to a crowdfunding poll. If we can raise the amount to do Florida, we'll do Florida. But then some other people, I told them, put in the comment thing that this is for the poll, right? And then a lot of people gave me feedback. If we don't raise enough for Florida, can we do like New Hampshire or Maine or something, a smaller state? The answer to that is yeah, we can. But so far, I haven't even been pushing this. And it's already, they've raised almost $1,000. So we're well on the way. I just put this up the end of last week. And I'm just like getting notifications. Bing, bing. I'm like, what? I look, and sure enough, you guys really are funding this thing. So it's in the explanation on YouTube. It's paypal.me/People's Pundit. And if you just make sure, because some people do this for PPD and other things, just make sure that you write in the note for polling or for Florida polling or whatever. This way, because the original intention was if we didn't raise it, I'm going to refund it. But then some people said, can we do a smaller state? Yeah, we can. But you guys, Robert, we didn't even push this thing really, right? I mean, really, we didn't even push it. And that's how much of a demand there is for somebody to do polling that they can look at.
And I think it'd be good be good long term to get this internal data, because it's not just, as we mentioned, about the top line. It's about a wide range of other information. I've never been concerned about top lines in polls ever, even when I was running campaigns. I was concerned with internal dynamics, issue dynamics, how the narration of the campaigns were being read and interpreted and understood, who was excited and enthused, who wasn't, which constituencies and communities were breaking in which directions, because that was better at forecasting. I mean, I ran a mayor's campaign where on election night, the 2 nights before, because of their internal polling, the opponent, who had like 10 times more money than we did, both newspapers, both parties that endorsed the opponent, the entire establishment was for the opponent. And my guy was an independent African-American candidate. And it was a nonpartisan race in the mayor's race, but they had leaked to the whole press that their guy was going to win by 30, and it was going to be over in the first half hour.
That's their internals, right? Yeah.
Yep. And they were right a week before. They just didn't understand that they were pushing undecideds too hard. They didn't understand what the underlying dynamics were. They didn't understand how black voters would break once they knew a black candidate was available. They didn't know the inroads we were making amongst religious conservatives and blue-collar voters particularly blue-collar voters that had historically not voted much for an African-American candidate in the city.
Right.
If they had seen their own internals within the internals of their internal, in other words, internal because it's internal to them as a campaign, but internals in terms of the inside data, the guts of the polling data, they would have seen information that would have told them they were much more at risk. But they were so cocky, they went around telling everybody they were going to win by 30 points. And people were telling me I was an idiot. We weren't going to stand a chance. And on election night, it was 51-47. We were 1 point away from a recall election for another election. And so we came in that close. By the way, that I had suspicions because there were unusual voter tendencies in certain precincts that were controlled by the local Democratic state senator, and it was his son-in-law who was our opponent. And I told people I think something was up. 3 years later, he and a bunch of them were all busted for other related criminal charges. And in all likelihood, we probably won that night. But he was a nice guy. He didn't want to rock the boat. He took sort of the McSally 2018 approach, which it worked for him, by the way. He's one of the nicest human beings in the world. I think he had mixed sentiments on being in politics.
To begin with. Yeah,
exactly. And because of it, he went from a guy making, $80,000 a year to doing extremely well because every company in town wanted him on their board. Because here was this strong, almost successful African-American candidate at first time ever and mayor, took on the entire political machine, almost won. And it was heavily helped by everybody thinking that he was going to lose by 30 points on election night because people didn't know how to read a poll, including all of the poll watching experts we have currently, Harry Enton and Nate Cohn. Nate Cohn finally got around to recognizing, the voter files are trending Republican almost everywhere. This is kind of weird.
I don't understand.
Exactly.
I've been sending Sean Trendy this stuff for years. Sean, you know it. It was D+6 in Wisconsin. It was D+6 when I first sent Sean Trendy a voter file. It was D+8. It was 2016, and then it just kept drifting and drifting and drifting and drifting. And now, for those who don't know, the last time we opened it up, what was it, like R+4? I mean, the thing is, there's a huge chunk of independents. Sure. So, who tend to vote.
I mean, Minnesota is now an R-lean state in the voter file.
Right. Yeah. So, it's inferred. Yep.
The states that have never leaned Republican in the voter file, at least in the modern history of the country. So it's extraordinary, what you're seeing. I realized Trendy, he was on with Sabato and others, and he really is like two areas where I disagree with him. One is that he really thinks Delaware County, right? I think where he lives, or near.
Shocker.
Yeah, he has some great blue collar Oklahoma roots. We took a class together on populism at Yale. That's where we met. And he's always been a very good, decent guy, human being. Where we disagreed a lot in 2016. He gave me a lot of credit afterwards, which a lot of those types wouldn't. People in his profession would not do. Naming Nate Cohn keeps pretending he doesn't know who I am. So it's that kind of reaction. But not from Sean. He was very fair, very open, very generous, and the rest. But where the two main areas I didn't fully realize how much he saw the lost majority in a different way than I did. So that's Trendy's own book. It was a book Steve Bannon cited as saying we need to win back the working class North, that helped educate the 2016 campaign. That Trendy himself didn't preview coming, and he explained that better in this discussion where he said he thought it was going to be someone like Walker, not someone like Trump. And I realized, oh, wow, he still doesn't even understand Wisconsin. Because Walker's success was W's 2000 success and almost 2004 success, which was a combination of the WOW suburbs. They call them WOW because the three counties are Waukesha, Washington, and Ozaukee, and they put the O in the middle and get WOW. That those counties and the Fox River Valley, which is in the eastern part of the state. That's where Walker has lived and died. Walker has never done very well in the western or northern parts of the state compared to, say, Trump. And what I didn't understand is that Wisconsin is I mean, you have Madison, which is literally its own world. Then you have Milwaukee, which is a traditional blue-collar urban northern city. The WOW suburbs, which are much more conservative and more middle class than upper middle class compared to, say, the Twin Cities or
right, because they're not as metro. They're not as like
not nearly as nobody really confuses.
You know what I'm talking about?
Milwaukee with metropolitan. So all my friends out there. I mean, I practiced in Wisconsin for many years, lived in Milwaukee for several years, but nobody confuses the two. Milwaukee's beer town. Milwaukee's where you film. What was that TV show? The Two Waitresses or whatever that was on forever. He's like a comedian, comedy kind of show. Yeah. What's her name?
Audience here.
Director, Shirley and something, Lauren, whatever it was. But that's Milwaukee, right? That's how you culturally perceive Milwaukee, because that's how it is. And even in the suburbs,
Shirley.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, it was killing me. And who is that? We got to give credit to somebody here. Lynn did it. Lynn Zaloy, unless I'm butchering your name. Thank you, Lynn. It was on the tip of my tongue. Mother used to love that. It's perfect example. Perfect.
I could hear the song. I could see them walking. That's Milwaukee, and still proudly Milwaukee. They have more. Like I used to tell a joke. There's like, if people want to understand the difference between Milwaukee and Chattanooga, where I grew up. In Chattanooga, when you're new there, they invite you to church on Sunday morning. In Milwaukee, they invite you to the bar on Saturday night. So it's a beer town. It's a blue collar town. It's an industrial town. It's the home of Pabst Blue Ribbon. So that's what Milwaukee is. Not very metropolitan. So that was Walker's base. Walker's base was a very non-metropolitan suburban vote, a Fox River Valley, working middle class, communitarian, vote, not very Norwegian. And not very anti-war, in fact, tend to be sort of pro-war. That was never going to be a model that could be replicated through the rest of the Midwest. And Sean seems to think that it was like a Delaware County type thing, when we don't even have a Delaware County in Wisconsin. We have Dane County, but Dane County thinks Delaware is a bunch of latte sippers. They're ready to join the revolution in Madison. They call it the People's Republic of Madison for a reason. They were Antifa before Antifa. They're a little nicer, but they're crazy. I mean, I used to live in the lesbian neighborhood in town because it had great architecture. Go to the lesbian coffee shop, and well, let's just say they're out. It's a different experience in Tennessee. So I'll be polite. So that gives a totally different mindset mentality. Is like he really thought that like Delaware County was like the Midwest, and then if you could appeal to those voters and some equivalent of the Fox River Valley, which doesn't exist in the rest of the Midwest, and in fact is counter the Norwegians that dominate western northern Wisconsin and large parts of Minnesota. Give people an idea: as many as 1 out of 5 voters is going to be of Norwegian ancestry in Minnesota. Like, it's amazing, and yet you've seen almost, other than this show, you'll see no discussion of it anywhere else. They are that group by themselves can put Trump back in the White House in Minnesota and Wisconsin and in parts of Iowa. So I think if we go back to the political choice, problem one is what Barrett does not have. Barrett's not the daughter of immigrants like the judge from Florida is. Legal. She's not so she doesn't have the American dream story going for her. She doesn't have all of the virtue signalers of the Republican side are going to have a big problem voting against the first Cuban, the first daughter of immigrants.
That's my point.
That combination is just going to be really difficult. Whereas, and we already know this because when she like Barrett both went through the nomination process under Trump for the federal appeal bench. And she's someone, by the way, who got appointed to the federal Florida State Court of Appeals back in 2006 with no problems with bipartisan support. Florida Supreme Court by Governor DeSantis with bipartisan support. Then when she's up for the 11th Circuit, she got 80 votes. 27 Democrats are going to have to turn around and explain why they just voted for her a year ago, but now suddenly she's totally unqualified. Yeah. So by contrast, Barrett got basically no Democratic votes, was extremely controversial. They barely got her through. And so we already know what's going to happen in advance. Barrett doesn't have the identity politics issues that the left is worried about. Like they think if they're opposing the Cuban, particularly in the 2016 election, they're opposing a Cuban from Florida. They want that. Then the Cuban community is going to be off the charts, and
they want to insult an incredibly important voter base from the most important battleground state.
Exactly. You could kiss Florida goodbye at that point. Not only that, the way Democrats think, this is a mistake, but this is the way they think all Hispanics are the same. Well, I like Joe Biden. There was a little bit more diversity in Hispanics than the black people.
Than black people. I think I got that clip.
So he understands there's a little bit of diversity, but not sure how much there. So in their mindset, it will look bad for them amongst all Hispanic voters, which they need for House races and Senate races, as well as the White House race in terms of Colorado and Arizona and Florida, and any competition they want to do in Texas, and some outside risk in New Mexico. So for them, being anti-Latina, they're going to hate. Being anti the daughter of immigrants, they're going to hate when they want to be the immigrant party. Being anti a woman. And being against a woman who they just almost all voted for just a year ago for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So she is the no-brainer choice. And then for Trump, how Trump's looking this up. All right, pretty, smart. Everybody says she'll be a great judge. She's Cuban. She's daughter of immigrants. She's got like 7 kids, big Catholic family. He's thinking plus, because he thinks visual. He thinks, how's this going to look on the TV news in Pittsburgh, in Miami, in Phoenix, and in Milwaukee, and in Minneapolis, and he sees it's all pluses.
Listen to this, right? Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Whereas with Barrett, Trump more than anybody understands, because he comes from that working class Northern tradition, that people that are perceived as, I really want to bring the power of the church into the courts, is going to scare more of his voters.
Those Rust Belt voters. Yeah. And the idea, the flip for people to, and there are reports that Lagoa is no longer being considered. I would not put too much stock into that yet. Trump is a head faker. He faked the hell out of everybody with the last 2. So don't listen. We have gotten emails, Robert. This happened last time just to throw us off, just to say, this is solid. Take it to the bank. He's going with so-and-so. And then all of a sudden he walks out and it's Neil Gorsuch. And you're like, what? I mean, at the very last minute, some people did get that, but he had head faked the hell and Kavanaugh, same thing. All right. So they have
he's scheduled a rally for Friday in Miami.
Yes. And also yes. And then also too, his election night headquarters are in Miami. Listen to these headlines from very scared journalists in Florida. All right. This, I believe, is Mark Caputo, who I like, by the way. Just want to say that at Politico. All right. I believe this is Caputo. He's always been fair to me. All right. I like him. And he says, Florida Republicans nominating Lagoa could clinch the state for Trump. All right. Potential Supreme Court nominee Barbara Lagoa could help Trump win Florida. In Miami, buzz over Cuban-American judge Barbara Lagoa as potential Trump pick. And then there's a slew of quotes about, damn it, damn it. If he picks it, we're not going to end it here. All right. I'm just saying, and I'll give you guys the flip side, to be fair. Yeah, she will get through the process. Yeah.
Whereas there's massive risk with Barrett. And then
you remember what happened with Barrett, right?
Yes.
I mean,
And the thing, for people who don't know, so Barrett became popular in a certain conservative circles because of her response to a question from Senator Feinstein that you could interpret fairly as being religiously bigoted. Now,
I thought it was. Robert, be honest. I thought it was too.
I saw it as a secular left, religious right divide, where you had a secular left not understand how they're coming across as bigoted, the religious right coming out the better of that question and answer section because it was not asked the way it could have been asked. The issue with Barrett is that Barrett wrote a piece when she was at Notre Dame where she basically said Catholic judges should recuse from any case where their conscience, the dictates of the church differ from what the law is. She actually skated this in a very Bill Clinton-esque way during that confirmation hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what she said is, I will not allow my religion to interfere with my duties. Well, that's what her article said too. Her article said, when your religion interferes with your duties, you recuse. So she didn't really, if I had been there, I would have been more concerned. I was not a fan of hers for reasons other than that. I thought those reasons. I'm not, I come from a more religiously conservative community, so I'm less concerned with that in general, with the church getting too much control, if you will, in the legal system. We don't live in the 17th century. It's the church of the left we have to fear today, which is not the church at all, but its own substitute for it. But but politically, I saw that as a red flag. I was concerned about her because she comes from old money South, and I know that old money South culture.
You know that culture, yeah.
Very well. And for forecasting judges, I've found knowing their life history was a much better predictor of who they would be than their political behavior or their behavior on the court even. So Barrett, so I had predicted to people when Barrett got on the bench that Barrett would be more a corporatist establishment, governmental deferential Bush-like right. And that's exactly how she's been. I mean, she's gone out of her way for everything from little cases to big cases. Little cases involving a woman wrongfully denied apartment access under regulatory takings law. She reinterprets takings so that takings law doesn't apply and the government can do whatever they want. A case where Obama.
You want to give people the deal with the lockdown, because I see you've been taking trying to explain to that ruling to people who are trying to go. Let me give you a second to explain to people what happened there.
Sure. So another quick preview of what she was going to do in the lockdown was, Obama's presidential library is co-opting city park space in an improper way under city law. A bunch of citizens sued to try to stop it. She came up with a squirrely definition of standing that kicked them out of court to protect Obama. So this is who she is. But then the Republican Party sued the governor. And there's the legal. Some people are focusing solely on their factual dispute. Their factual dispute is more limited. The problem with her decision is what else she said in that decision. So they were arguing, look, there's these different rules for churches versus parties. None of it really makes sense. We shouldn't be restricted in our political association. We should be able to hold rallies. Barrett said no, said the lockdown is just fine. And so some people in trying to defend her decision have been saying, well, it's because that was this limited issue. But that's not where she stopped with her decision. She went on in her decision and cited the Jacobson case, one of the most horrendous cases ever issued in the Supreme Court jurisprudence. And for people who are following this, clearly people like Shipwrecked Crew and others are not in the weeds on this. And I think he's a great guy, very smart, clearly very smart lawyer, criminal defense background. But I haven't known him to be involved in these issues. People can go to see Harmeet Dillon. And Harmeet Dillon has been more polite because she's very well connected. But she keeps saying we should not have a nominee who has said who has supported the Jacobson decision, because she's in the weeds on this. And so to give people some background, there's a trilogy of infamy of Supreme Court decisions that basically allowed the government to do whatever they wanted in the name of, quote, public health or an emergency. And the first one was the Jacobson decision. And in Jacobson, they said that a person could be denied a trial, which is what really happened in that case, on whether or not a vaccine was effective, and could be forced to take that vaccine as a condition of access to a community experiencing an epidemic. But their language was horrendous. And this is back in 1905, when they weren't enforcing the civil rights amendments at all back then, unless you were a corporation, like the slaughterhouse cases. Otherwise, they were not enforcing any of it. Segregation happened because the Supreme Court greenlit it. Racial oppression happened because the Supreme Court greenlit it. Anti-democratic provisions happened because the Supreme Court greenlit it. Most of them appointed by Democrats. So the Jacobson decision said, all the government has to do is say public health emergency, and we, the courts, have no role. You just do, as long as it's in any way rational. If it has any possible connection to it, then you can do whatever you want. And this was before certain legal standards existed in America, like strict scrutiny, etc. A few decades later, up goes the Connie Buck case, forced sterilizations of poor women in America, where the Nazis got their ideas, by the way, from the
eugenics program. Yep.
Which, by the way, Ginsburg had said a lot of eugenicist type things over the years. That's why I'm not going to be crying a lot. We're past the 72-hour decency period since she's passed.
Right. Robert, do you remember a 72-hour decency period when Scalia died? I don't. I remember horrible
second tier period for judge, and Scalia
horrible.
Unlike Ginsburg, had never said any of some of the horrendous things. Their disagreement with Ginsburg was mostly ideological. Yes. Whereas with what Ginsburg said were things like that there should be a taxpayer-funded abortions to make sure certain populations don't have too much growth.
Yes.
It's racist, it's elitist, and it's deep, and it's eugenicist. So that's why I'm not going, and she wasn't a big intellectual heavyweight. But so in the history, the Connie Buck decision comes up. They cite the Jacobson decision. They rely upon the Jacobson decision to say, if the government can do whatever you want, including forced involuntary sterilizations on poor women. Following that decision, Oh, you know what? There's no way Trump picks Barrett. I'm not going to go into details why, but the two photos explain. Just go back to listen to the way Trump discussed. Hey, maybe it's wrong, but I'm just saying you got to know Trump.
This is for people who don't know. Can we get?
Yeah,
this is Barbara Lagoa.
This is
right?
a big disparity, folks, in favor of Barbara Lagoa. Just
and
saying.
I mean, look, I think they're both relatively attractive women. But I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I am married to a Hispanic woman, so I think I am biased. It just is what it is.
But your instincts are correct. She would be the prettiest Supreme Court justice we've ever had, and
no doubt, no doubt.
Trump's thinking, and it's not because he's like chauvinist. It's because he's thinking about visuals. I mean, I still think he picked Pence in part because, he's got the buzz cut, he's got the walk, he looks like a Marine. And he's got the Bible thing going for him. I mean, that's just the way Trump's brain works. God bless him. So that's why I think he was. I think as soon as I saw Lagoa's name on the list 2 weeks ago, I said, Trump's going to pick Lagoa the next time he gets the chance. And that he was probably tipped off that Ginsburg was in bad health because the media kept that.
Yeah, don't you find, folks, because I got that question a lot, Robert. I mean, he had just brought it up. And by the way, today, Biden said he will not give, he reaffirmed that he will not give potential lists. I can tell you already, I don't have them in front of me, but Biden does have a list. He just is not going to tell the world about it. They are both from California. They're African-American women. And that is who we got this the other day from a very reliable source. And it's it. That's it.
If I was advising Biden, I would have told him to leak one name.
Yeah.
Leak Michelle Obama as your choice.
One is, it's not, neither one of them are Michelle. They're both from California. And do you know who I'm talking about? One is pretty damn radical, man. I mean,
yes. They're pure activist court judges they want to put on the bench.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the other one, but the one is like.
That's why it's critical to get this nomination through, because there's risk if it doesn't get through, it blows everything up on the election side of the aisle, which then will lead to these other kind of appointees. And so Lagoa, because of her life background, life history, jurisprudence, also she has a more middle-class upbringing, which I like more rooted in the local community. Not only the daughter of immigrants, stayed in Miami, went up to Columbia for law school, came back to Miami, took risk as a pro bono lawyer, did not go the judicial clerkship route. The people who go that route tend to be Washington insider, establishment types, Justice Roberts types. There's much higher risk of Barrett being that way than Lagoa, in my view. But from a pure political perspective, Lagoa has a very high chance of being confirmed. Barrett, a very low chance of being confirmed.
It'll be a fight with Barrett. I mean, there's just no doubt. It'll be a fight.
And the secondary aspects of that, for people who think, this is where I think both the religious right and secular left are in their bubbles politically. Yeah, I do not think it is advantageous for Trump to be having a fight over whether or not he's nominated someone who wants to bring back the 17th century Catholic Church to the court, because that's how she will be portrayed. And I understand people are like, well, that in a certain turnout battles and midterms, it could be net effective. Nixon back in the 70s twice nominated crazy justices to the Supreme Court just to get the South all up and mad when the Democrats wouldn't allow those candidates to go through. He had no intention of letting him go through. He did it solely to remind the South, this is why you should be with me, not the Democratic Party. So there would be an argument for that. And I hear that argument. But my view is that your typical working class Northerner is a little scary about the preachy, controlling side of the Republican Party, and and that's not the thing. If I'm Trump, I want to highlight in a close election. I don't want somebody who comes across as like Opus Dei-ish, the charismatic secret religious groups that to a lot of these people are going to sound cultish, even if it's totally unfair. Just remember, 3/4 of Americans don't go to church very often, if at all. So for a lot of Americans, religiously observant behavior is weird. So that's why if they want someone that it relates to. In other words, okay, you go to church on Christmas and on holidays, and you lie to the pollster and pretend you go to church every month, that they relate to. Like Trump's whole base was your non-church going evangelicals. And then the post media could never figure this out. They're like, why is
That's
Trump
how we got to 80. That's how we got to 80, folks. I mean, really. Hey, it's just true. Why do they like? Well, I mean, it's a way of life choice, Robert. And
for people who don't want to be judged and don't like what they would call church lady, Saturday Night Live type personality.
My pastor calls them the unchurched nuns. Andy Stanley. He calls him. Well, I mean, I got to find a place where it's a satellite around. Since we moved, he's no longer my pastor unless I find a satellite for him. But he calls them the unchurched nuns. And for these people, you need to make them feel like they're not being judged. And you got to make them feel, it's not that they don't share your values. They do share your values.
Oh, absolutely.
But they're not going to come into church unless they feel that this is a church for unchurched people. Like, right. So he's right about that. He's dead right.
A lot of these folks are only going to go on special occasions and holidays. So your Catholics, which is your normal Catholic in the working class community in the North, doesn't go every Sunday. And so it's for that voter group, they fear church-state intermingling in certain groups like the Norwegians, and then in the other working class groups they fear judgment, and they fear kind of paternalistic, preachy kind of mindset. That's why, like, Ted Cruz had zero chance in the Northeast Republican primary.
He would have gotten, this is for those because Fox even is right on this, Robert, right? So they had every never Trumper. Once they failed, Cruz was kind of like their last best effort. And I tell people this all the time. Which one of your candidates was going to win Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin even? Cruz did better in the Wisconsin primary, but in a general electorate in Wisconsin, he would have gotten murdered. I'm sorry. Killed. In Michigan, even worse. He would have got crushed. I mean, think about Ashland and Douglas in the northwestern part of the state, how Trump actually fought it decently up there because he was a labor guy as opposed to being like that conservative, like you. I mean, we're not trying to, I'm just simply saying that it doesn't matter if you're judgmental or not. The media has made you are perceived as being that way. So whether or not it's fair is irrelevant. Right. It's sad, but it's true. It's irrelevant. And with Trump, he can, at this point, Robert, anything that pulls away from coronavirus, which is why I put up there, though you don't want to get into with Amy Coney Barrett, one downside could be that they get mired in procedural, right? They get mired in, because you can do that to a white woman, a white conservative woman. You may not be able to do that to a Hispanic woman, though, right? So it would be harder to use parliamentary gimmicks to hold up somebody. That could be a historic pick. Right, like because that's how they think, and if you do, and now they're already worried that if he does go in a more unconventional direction, then look, coronavirus. That's why we did the ranked distribution score, because coronavirus, if you ask people what is their most important issue, it looks worse. It looks like it's more important than it really is, and then when you ask them to rank, here's 8 issues. Rank them from most important to least important, right? Then coronavirus falls, and you can see it in the ranked distribution score. And look at where that's Joe Biden's best issue. 79.6% who chose coronavirus first are going with Biden. So to knock that down, everyone else is essentially going with Trump, except for the issue of healthcare, which is getting closer, by the way. He's killing Biden on policing and crime. He's killing him on the economy. He's killing him on immigration. Immigration is the 5th this time, which is up from number 7 or something. So it's risen,
Oh, exactly. And I think that's what goes back. The reason why coronavirus can partially come back in with Barrett is because of her lockdown decision, which is against what Trump wanted to have happen in terms of the lockdowns, undercuts Trump's message against Biden. Because to go back briefly, that sort of trilogy of infamy that started with the decision in Jacobson was it led to Buck and the Supreme Court saying you could do forced sterilizations in the name of public health. Then it led to Korematsu, which said you could lock up Japanese people in the name of a wartime emergency. That Jacobson was the basis of all of those decisions. So if you believe in Jacobson, you believe that the judiciary has no role at all, and that there's basically an emergency exception to the United States.
Right.
And even Roberts wasn't willing to go that far when he refused to get involved in doing anything about the discrimination taking place on churches. So she went even further than Roberts would have, and Roberts did go in terms of allowing governors to do whatever they wanted. So we do not want, and you combine that kind of state authoritarianism with an overt, I'm going to do what the church tells me to do kind of statements in her history, which he's only partially, that is not a good combination politically in the court of public opinion, in my view, in swing states for the Republicans. I think that's a net lose. So aside from the fact, I think she would struggle to get through and struggle to get confirmed, which is the number one problem politically. The number two problem is I think she would not play well in the court of public opinion, and that in turn will influence the first one. Because if they see any polls, when we already have dubious polling in the first place, that's Democratic tilted, if Collins sees anything that's problematic, if Gardner sees anything that's problematic, if McConnell even sees anything that's problematic, you're going to have people jump ship. And what will happen is McConnell probably won't even bring her to a vote. He'll just ask to substitute
if they run like that. Yeah. If they run,
or she gets rejected on the eve of it, which will discourage press conservatives. So that's where Barrett is the high risk choice. Lagoa is the no brainer choice. And I've always trusted Trump's political instincts on choices like these. And so I think he'll make the smart, savvy choice because all the politics lines up easily for Lagoa. So that's the long and short of Lagoa. I personally don't like Barrett because I think she would be an authoritarian judge and bad for civil rights, civil liberties, and the Constitution. I think she would be a worse version of Roberts. So that's why I'm hostile, so that's my view of her.
That's a damning indictment, I mean, look, that's one. Some people, like most of the people watching in the comments, you're winning them over on Lagoa. I can tell you just from reading it. But I mean, look, I mean, she's not going to be like a Justice Breyer, folks. We're not trying to say that. Just for some people, it's just that who knows, though, in this day and age anymore, right?
She played the game. She game played. She came from Old Money South. Dad was the Shell Oil Company guy from New Orleans. I know those folks. I would not trust those people with power in any position of life. Whereas I got a daughter of immigrants who grew up in the middle class, who took risks to take pro bono cases like Ilian Gonzalez, chose not to play the political game of doing the clerkship route, chose not to play the bogus game of pretending she had certain public views on the subject so that she could get permission and so she would rise up. She stayed quiet about it, stuck to her guns. Some of her words have been misinterpreted. During the appellate process, they asked Lagoa, would you obey precedent? Well, you have to obey U.S. Supreme Court precedent.
Right.
Judge. She said yes. They asked her, well, what about Roe v. Wade, which is super precedent? She said, I don't know what super precedent is. I'll obey precedent as long as I'm on the lower level of the bench. People have deliberately misinterpreted that to say she's pro-choice, which is ridiculous. And that tells me that the old establishment conservative types are the real ones pushing her. There's people out there pretending that Lagoa is the candidate of the Federalist Society. No, she's not. They've all been approved by the Federalist Society, by the way. Trump unfortunately delegated his decision making to the Heritage Institution and the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society on who got to the list originally. So whenever you see anyone say, "Oh, well, the Heritage Institution likes this," or "Big Business likes this one," or they like them all, Big Business, the Heritage Foundation, they like everybody on Trump's list. I would prefer that list to be broader, but of that list, the most populist and one that has the best life history to indicate constitutional civil rights constitutionalism is actually Lagoa between her and Barrett. Now,
I'll play, devil's advocate here though, Robert, and just answer this because, the people who want Amy Coney Barrett are going to make the case that she is a suburban white woman in the image of like so many others that are slipping with Donald Trump. And this would be a way to win them back. I'm not, but that's their argument.
Exactly. That's not how it would translate. Because how it would translate is that suburban woman that's the kind of voter that's marginal is not a pro-life voter. Probably leans a little pro-choice, but doesn't like the extreme abortion.
That's right. Yeah, that's still true. That's why Dave Wasserman, again, struck out and missed on that one. So, like, if you were to look at the 10, 15, 20%, and depending on state, that he's saying, or Trump voters in 2016 were actually pro-choice, this many... Not when you tell them the reality of abortion. They are horrified. They're not full-blown pro-choice. If you ask them what designation, they'll say pro-choice because they believe it should be, like Bill Clinton said, legal but almost, unnecessary. Legal but rare. Yes, thank you.
Genius Clinton.
That was great.
That was smart.
But they don't believe that you should be ripping out babies at 9 months old. They don't.
And they're disturbed and unsettled by abortion in general. And they don't want the church running people's personal lives, which is how a lot of them interpret abortion.
Yes,
but at the time, they don't like abortion themselves. Most of them wouldn't approve of abortion themselves. They wouldn't want their daughter to get an abortion themselves.
That's right.
They know people that have had an abortion and who regretted it and were scarred by it. So that's the conflict they have. But for someone like Barrett is going to come across as an authoritarian, church-oriented version of that. That hurts with that voter, doesn't help. It's another example of confusing demographics with policies. It's like the media can't understand why evangelicals love Trump, because they love his policies. They ain't voting for preacher; they're voting for president. And they understand that. Suburban moms are the same way. Suburban moms will be much more comfortable with Lagoa, who still offers you all of that. She has, I think, 4 kids, 3 kids, whatever. She has a bunch of kids, big family, big happy Cuban, your classic Cuban kind of family. She had her whole family together, went the 11th Circuit deal, had her family together again at I guarantee there's going to be like a huge Cuban style party when she gets nominated. So that's just that. She's even more family-ish.
If she was to get nominated, I would love to be at that party. The food would be amazing.
Oh, it'd be fantastic. Latin parties.
Oh, wow.
I had a party with some friends in Argentina.
The best.
Yeah, started at 6 p.m., ended at midnight. Ended at
loud,
ended
but
at noon.
best.
Sorry, noon the next day. But yeah, so she gives you that, but she will, that voter looks at as issues. And for issues, the identity issue politics side is solely to screw with the media and the Democrats and the virtue signaler Republicans. That's the advantage of Lagoa on that side. But on the policy side of the equation, Lagoa comes across as a smart, has a better story, frankly. I mean, she's the American dream. She's what Trump wants to be in that balance of immigration. Tough on illegal immigration, but
rewarding
on the American dream and
rewarding.
She's that story. Also, she's the anti-communist story. While radical leftism is surging, her family had to flee a country because of radical leftism. She would be dead today if she had stayed in that country. So, I mean, there's she's got that part of the story. Got the part of staying rooted in Florida. Fought for Elian Gonzalez when it was controversial to do so. I know some people don't like her because of the Bush connections. Again, folks, everybody on that list is tied to the.
So, look, there. Bill Barr, for those of you who don't know, when Poppy Bush passed away, George W. Bush went to the White House, and Donald Trump had to replace, the Attorney General, and they actually asked him to look at Bill Barr. And when I heard that, my radar just started going, oh, man, here we go with a Mueller 2.0 cover-up investigation. Here we go again. And Bill Barr turned out to be the only damn adult in the room in that place, So it's not, it's hard to totally root out those connections. I would just say this, that sometimes, and what we call the Rauner effect, right, is that you don't need, if you're trying to reach that white suburban woman, and I'm going to play devil's advocate against the other people, right? If you're trying to reach that white suburban woman, sometimes it's not pandering, right? So you virtue signal. It's like they take it as a virtue. So if you were to pick a minority woman who has a story like Robert is talking about, it actually does score you points with those people anyway, right? So just like Bruce Rauner, he increased his white vote while still getting more in Chicago by reaching out to the minority communities in Chicago. He didn't get more of the white vote in those burbs, that typically don't vote Republican, never really did after years, or in recent years anyway. He didn't get them back to the fold by pandering to them. He virtue signaled. I mean, essentially, maybe he wasn't really maybe it was legit a reach out. Maybe it wasn't. I'm not making that point. I'm simply saying that some of those voters see it as a virtue signal, and they like it, though, in a positive way for them. So,
yes.
What I'm saying? So,
it's good for Trump, right? Trump's next to a Latina. Trump's next to a woman. Trump's next to a smart but family-oriented woman. So all of the visuals look great for Trump, and then the narrative looks good for Trump, and then the media has a hard time. They're going to tell the Cuban born of dream of immigrant story because it's too much of a media kind of narrative to avoid, even if it helps Trump. They're going to have a hard time. Ultimately there'll be lots of shots at her, no doubt, but it's just too tempting.
There always would be, though, Robert. No matter what.
Whereas as soon as Barrett gets nominated, it's hit piece, day after day after day after day. And
it's going to constantly whack her.
Yeah, and they'll have some resonance. I mean, what she wrote in that Notre Dame opinion is once she wrote that, she created a situation where and especially given how political she was by seeking out Supreme Court clerkships and the way she approached her career. Her husband was a U.S. attorney. Then he became a banking lawyer. To write that opinion, usually that's a sign that you're soliciting support from the Opus Dei types, and Opus. Well, there's obviously some conspiracy theories that go too far. There's also problems with Opus Dei. There was a disproportionate influence for a period of time happened under W of these uber conservative Catholics that, some of them down deep, are still opposed to the Protestant Revolution, if you get to know them. So I'm not overly comfortable with these people in positions of power.
Yeah.
I'm not overly worried of the sort of nightmare dystopia that people predict, but they're just not people I trust in positions of power. A lot of the reasons connected to Louis Freeh and what happened with the FBI, the guy at the FBI who was leaking information in the CIA Elder James case. A lot of that was Opus Dei connected as to why it ever got as bad as it got. So there's legitimate concerns about Opus Dei that have been masked. Even Dan Brown writes a book about Opus Dei, so that gives you an idea of how much cultural influence they've had in certain parts of the world. And why write an opinion that says what she wrote? That's an unusual for someone as politically ambitious as she appeared to be by her career path. Why write an opinion that says every federal judge should choose the Pope over the Constitution and recuse themselves? I'm sorry, that's where Human Events last year said this is not someone that should be considered. And Human Events is on the right, Will Chamberlain, other people on the sort of populist right, but on the right. There's those stories, like even if you think those stories are totally false, they have an easy natural resonance with the media. And that means, and I believe they'll have an easy natural resonance with your swing type voter whose big concerns about Republican court nominees is maybe they'll be too authoritarian and maybe they'll be too much church state intermingling. And that's not the strong point for him. And you still get in Lagoa, Catholic. She just has never said these kind of comments before.
Right. Yeah, it's not out there. Like she doesn't have that target on her back. There's no doubt. There's just no doubt. And there's no other way to put this, but if you're worrying about people who are worried, and I put that up just to show people the difference in the rank distribution scores. That's what I was talking about before, real quick, before I move on my point. Look at if coronavirus falls when you do the rank distribution score, it does. And any movement away from coronavirus is good for Donald Trump. There's just no doubt. But she doesn't have, and there's just no nice way to put this, Robert. She doesn't look like the scary type. I'm not trying to say Coney Barrett is scary. It's just when you put all of this together, it's not as difficult. Yeah. And Lagoa looks
target.
Yeah. And Lagoa looks she's got different optics, Robert. She just looks like she's easier to get along with and everyone's like friend, Yeah.
Well, yeah, your wife. If you know the Hispanic kind of maternal community,
that's what I'm trying to say, and I don't know how to put it into words.
She telegenically resonate with the public. That's just that personality is that way. And for the people that might be saying, "Hey, I don't trust a Bushite," remember DeSantis really liked her too. Matt Gaetz really liked her too. So I see people saying, "Well, Rubio is pushing her." Well, of course Rubio is pushing her. The whole
he's from come on, right? They stick together.
Don't read much into that.
It's not Big Sugar's pick. They're from the same community, folks. They're good at push each other. That's it.
This would be for Cubans. It would matter a lot. Wow, we're so recognized as part of America now that we have someone on the Supreme Court of the United States that came from our community. It will lock in Trump in Florida. Biden. I think that was already heading that direction. But Biden will cancel his trip to Florida.
I can tell you guys from just talking to people they're absolutely terrified that he picks her. They're just going to take it off the board. They'll focus in the Midwest like crazy and try to box him out, which, like I said, I'm with you on this. I think we were kind of there anyway, but it could be the difference between like 3 points to 4 or 5 points. It really, which in Florida is a lot, or, it could be very close if Trump has a closer election, but this would just make it one of those oddball states where if the race was this close, how did Florida go that early kind of thing, right? So it would, because you're looking down in southeastern Florida and he's at 45%. Then what the hell are you going to do about it, right? It doesn't really matter where else you're going to. He needs to be mired in the low 30s, mid 30s. This could keep him up at, like, I don't know, DeSantis. It was pushing on the door of. It is not impossible for a Republican to get in the low 40s if they really kill it over there, right? It's not impossible.
The storyline: Trump, the supposed anti-immigrant president, is
that's right.
First daughter of immigrants on the Supreme Court of the United States. The anti-Hispanic president is the one who puts the first Cuban-American woman on the bench in American history. I mean, it goes counter all the media's hate narratives about him.
Sure
so it in particular plays well in Florida, but I think will play well across the board. And most importantly, best chance to get her confirmed so that she's there. And unlike Barrett, at least doesn't not have a record of being pro-lockdown and deferring to the government. And most important, she was on the 11th Circuit panel that just recently said no, felons actually have to serve their whole sentence before they can get to vote. And if people don't like it, take it up with the legislature. The court's job isn't to sit here and rewrite those rules. So she's already said, I mean, she's got a decade on the Florida Court of Appeals. So we know her jurisprudence, and it's a pretty consistent, I would say, pragmatic conservatism with a good principled perspective, somewhere between Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, nowhere near Roberts. And so that's my take on her. So I think she'd actually be a great justice too. But putting all that aside, politically, she's the no-brainer choice. Any other choice, risky.
Yeah, that's a good place to lock it up. I just want to add this before we do. I still know both Republicans and Democrats who will tell you that George Bush, they made a critical error opposing Miguel Estrada the way they did. And some of it was like, legit. You could, really. But some of it was not. And some of it was just smears and, right? You remember the fight back then.
Oh, yeah.
And George Bush was seen as somebody who was trying to give Hispanics a place in some of these institutions that they had been denied previously. And for those who don't know, haven't been listening or doing this for this many years, it wasn't always so lopsided like it was under, maybe 2008 and 2012, the giant margins that Barack Obama ran up against his Republican opponents. It wasn't always like that. Now, things have changed over the years. And, I'm just making that point. Trump's on the upswing anyway with some Hispanics, and it really it couldn't hurt is what I'm, it couldn't hurt. All right, let's I guess, call it a wrap here at 4:08. It's my little daughter's birthday today. I got to take her shopping for something. Yeah.
Her. And for everybody out there who follows for the bets, still recommending Bet Trump. Bet Trump Michigan, Bet Trump Minnesota, Bet Trump Wisconsin, Bet Trump Ohio, Bet Trump Iowa, Bet Trump Pennsylvania, Bet Trump Florida, Bet Trump Arizona. And I might, if they could change the election rules to not allow it to be counting for 2 weeks afterwards, I would also recommend betting Trump Nevada is worth the odds, because if it's still more than 3-1, bet Trump on Nevada. And then just briefly on the Senate, bet that Republicans hold the Senate, and increasingly based on really looking inside the polls and how I think the Supreme Court will shake out, vote on Collins holding her seat in Maine.
People asked, where do you bet, Robert? I mean, I don't want to promote one, but what are your favorite spots?
So if you're in the United States, the only legally clear place to do so is at Predicted.
Yeah.
Predicted,
right.
And the way you can bet is you can bet on something happening or bet against the opposite of the thing happening. Now they have limits. So about $850 per bet. And it's also limited by how many people are willing to trade with you on an open market. So that's where you can trade. And for most people, they're not trading the kind of amounts I'll be betting. Predict it will be more than sufficient. There's also offshore books, and that varies legality-wise depending on where you're at. It used to be clearly recognized that political betting was legal. It's never been ruled illegal in the United States. They just took back the rule that made it clear that it was definitely legal. They just left it in gray space instead. And if you're overseas, the best place to bet is with Betfair or at the British or Irish bookies. And so when I bet, I do Predict It, and then I go over to the United Kingdom and will be betting either, if I can, on Betfair, where you can trade in and out of the markets. That's where I give a lot of advice. And if you're anywhere international, you can do it that way. That's the best way, because you can buy and sell and not wait for the election. Like I said, Legault was going to be the likely pick right after Ginsburg passed away. If you bought her right then, in terms of
solid
markets, you could have already tripled your money in 3 days. If you just been following this show, you would have already made 30% profits over the last
right. I know it. Yeah.
And you can do that on Predict It. You can get in and out of the market. It's a more limited market. But when I bet usually with the British bookies over in the United Kingdom. I'll be making that trip sometime closer to election day.
Yeah, and I just I'll answer one more before we go. Look, Tillis is no stranger in North Carolina to trailing in the polls. Not a single public poll had Tom Tillis beating Kay Hagan in 2014. There was one which was a partisan poll and maligned as such by Harper. That was one of the finals that had Tillis up by like 2, and they nailed it. But they were totally dumped Robert on, right? I mean, when they released that poll back then, nobody believed them. And they were like, it's a partisan poll. It's garbage. Kay Hagan was up anywhere between 7 to 15 points early polling. Now that we started to get after Labor Day, it tightened to around like 3 to 9, and generally as we got right up into the last week or two of that race, it began to really get tight. And there were even some polls that showed ties, but Tillis never led. I will say, though, he is a little vulnerable because he to these senators out there, you brought this on yourself, entertaining the Mueller hoax for 2 years when everybody in the Republican base understood that this was a hoax, right? So you hurt yourself doing that. So Tillis has some ground to make up because his trail is among those men that they're not opposed to voting for a Democrat. They're not, especially in local elections. North Carolina's funny like that. That's how Cooper got elected governor, folks. That's how it happened. So this is why the more sometimes these senators listen to the conventional political wisdom, the more danger they put themselves in, when in fact they're doing it to try to avoid that. And it's just dumb. It's just dumb. Have a spine with the voters is always the safest bet.
Oh yeah, and for that, on that side of the equation, to wrap up the betting recommendations, betting the Senate stays Republican, betting that Maine goes to Collins and stays Republican. I am betting on the Republican to hold in North Carolina and in Iowa. Betting on a Republican upset, given where the odds are in Michigan. Not betting on the Republican in either Colorado or Arizona currently.
Yeah.
That's where I am on the Senate. And on the House, I think there's a 1 in 3 chance the Republicans take back the House. Currently, they're trading at 1 in 6. So I'm probably going to pull the trigger on that after I do some more research over the next 10 days. But right now, bet Republican, not because I think there's more likely than not, but I think there's at least a better chance than the odds makers say, because right now the generic congressional ballot is trading 3 to 4 points lower than it was at this point in 2018. And that would be enough to swing the House, particularly if this turnout phenomenon that the Epoch poll for big data that Richard did also shows up in that kind of turnout. Because if you get a bunch of Trumpist turnout that vote Republican down ballot and a bunch of Biden voters not turn out, millennial voters that were going to vote Democrat down ballot, by the way, it's a problem with the Democrats kicking the Greens off of all these ballots. A lot of those Green voters, probably half to 2/3 of them, just won't vote when they don't have a candidate out there, and they tended to vote Democrat down ballot because the Greens tend not to field candidates at the congressional level. So, half a point may matter come election day in a lot of these congressional districts.
See how tight that generic ballot is? It damn well could. It really, especially in the likely voter. I mean, it's not that big of a lead for Democrats anyway in the regular, registered voter sample. But when we did the likely, and Trump, in some of these areas, Trump is actually, it looks like it's this phenomena again, where the polls show Trump underperforming some of these candidates. But in truth, it looks like history is just going to repeat itself again, where Trump actually does overperform them and pull them. What could counteract that, or at least obscure it, is what Robert's talking about. When we were polling in the Rust Belt poll, the Greens were still going to be on the ballot in Wisconsin. That was going to happen. They're booting them off in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania now, they booted them off. So, it will keep the someone else choice, because Joe Jorgensen's there. There's going to be some little third partiers on some of this. But for the most part, that does hurt. It's like anything and everything they can do, Robert, to get this guy a handicapped, right? I mean, the point is this, speaking of betting, to use a betting term, they're handicappers, and that's what they're trying to do. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Like, what is Joe Jorgensen's on the ballot. So, it's almost like they really needed to remove her.
And just one, I guess, as one addendum before we close, there is evidence from the Epoch Times poll for both a shy Trumper effect and a hidden Trump voter. And because if you're going to theoretically test that, what you would look for is a big disparity between who people think that is going to win and who they think they're going to vote for that's demographically distinct. That would be a sign that that's a sign of a shy Trump voter, because you would expect the socially media sensitive vote to be the one not to want to honestly admit that they're voting for Trump, but will say, oh, but other people are. And similarly with a hidden Trump voter and unusual demographics of third-party support. So both of those showed up in the Epoch Times poll that are favorable to Trump. So not only do I think undecideds disproportionately lean to him, enthusiasm heavily favors him for turnout disparities that will put him over the top. But if, in my view, you look at, there is evidence of a shy Trump voter, because the kind of voter you would expect to either overstate their support for a third-party candidate or have a disparity between who they say they're going to vote for and who they think others are going to vote for are your socially media-sensitive groups. So they're disproportionately women, disproportionately younger voters, disproportionately minority voters. Those are the groups that you'd think that in my community, I probably shouldn't tell anybody I'm voting Trump. But then we'll turn around and tell you, oh, but I think more people are voting for Trump than anybody knows. Well, it wouldn't make sense that a Hispanic or a Black or a millennial or a younger woman voter would say that, because their community is actually pro-Biden. So what they're really telling you when you see that kind of disparity is, well, I'm really voting for Trump, but I don't want anybody to know about it. So I think there is the poll does provide evidence, empirical evidence for both a shy and hidden Trump voter effect that will help them come election day.
And what we didn't, because we did miss this, we could probably talk about this for another half hour about that one question, but one area where the registered voter and likely voter findings did not change that much was on the question of whether or not you think Joe Biden's going to win or Donald Trump's going to win. So really the same spread. I mean, it was a tenth of a percentage point in difference, which tells you a lot. So everything else showed a pretty large disparity and shift, except for this. So that's the evidence Robert's talking about, really is. All right, folks. Well, look, it's 4:17. Do not miss us again next week at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to follow Robert on Twitter at Barnes_law. Okay. Can we get that up there? We got that still? I guess I probably put it somewhere. I don't know. But to answer one more question before we go. All right. Somebody said, how much do we need and how much do we get there? I mean, it depends. If we're going to do mixed mode, somewhere around 5. If we're going to do maybe one single mode, I could do it for a little less, but we're already more than 20% now, thanks to, where is it? I wanted to give them a shout out. Where'd you guys go?
For everybody out there, that's if you want to see publicly funded polling happen now and in the future for a very, very discounted rate with a reliable pollster, this is what Richard is offering as an option.
Ethan and Gordon, because of you guys, you just bumped us up there another little bit. So, yeah, I mean, at first I didn't think this was a feasible option, so I didn't really push it. And then over the weekend, it was like, bang, 20% within a couple of days, and we didn't even push it. So if it is, it is. And then I did see somebody make a comment, what about Arizona? Look, if we don't get to the mark with Florida and we can do a smaller state like in New Hampshire or Maine or in Arizona, maybe I'll just do like some kind of little mock poll on Twitter, since you're all on Twitter anyway. You're like, pick one. Which one wins gets it, right? I mean, we're trying to be fair, right?
And for anybody asking, it's the PayPal link that's in the description of the video, of the YouTube.
Yeah. Yep. And I think we've shot it out before. I'll shoot it out again. But don't forget, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Inside the Numbers. All right. And we'll be back. What are the odds with new graphics. I know I said it was going to be, but it really will be this week. Maybe also too, Robert, I'll shoot them over. There's just like 3 different ones. They're all cool. So get your input from them. All right. And we'll have complete with new graphics next week. It'll be neat, but that's 2 p.m. Don't miss it. 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Monday. All right. And follow Robert again, one more time, at Barnes_law. All right. And we all know where to find me, but all right, folks, we're going to kick rock.